And welcome to Rewind Reviews, the podcast where myself and my good buddy Chris watch movies from our youth. Sometimes we're choosing a movie one of us hasn't seen, one of us has, or we're choosing like a film that we saw when we were young and we're hoping will or won't have aged well. It's basically nostalgic movies for us, generally speaking. A lot of movies from the 80s and 90s, based on the year we were born, I guess. This week, I had the option to choose, and I chose, was it 1995? Is it 1995? No, 1985 was last week. That was Rent-A-Kid. No, 97, Starship Troopers. So we're doing Starship Troopers. Now, I'm a big fan of this movie. Massive fan of this movie. And I've been very excited to show Chris this film for a long time. I think I did the right thing, though, in showing Chris RoboCop first, because we did RoboCop a couple seasons ago on this. Because I feel like RoboCop really does set you up for what this movie is in many ways. How you feeling?
Let's do history first, because I got none. I got no history with this movie. I didn't see it. I wasn't particularly aware of it by kind of osmosis. I've heard it referenced.
Right.
I knew it was a movie. But I had no touch point for it. So what? You're obviously not the case for you. So what's your history?
So this is one of those movies that I got to see and I probably shouldn't have seen. So what's 97? So I'm 10 when the movie comes out. So I'm probably 11 or 12 when it gets onto like VHS. And probably if memory serves with this one, I feel like this was one of the movies that I got because an unspecified relative was one of the only relatives had Sky and access to cable TV, but it was an illegal connection. That's why I'm unspecifying the relative. They've been like hooked up to the grid with illegal cable. And basically,
you don't really hear of that happening. I know that was a big thing in America. And I remember a Simpsons episode all about that and stuff. But which hit home really hard for me because I was like, oh yeah, I did have a relative that had illegal cable.
Yeah, they got
it. You just didn't hear of that happening much in the UK.
No, I don't think it was very common. I only know of one person who ever did it. So, but they had a special line into the house in a box. They gave a guy, I don't know. They put a certain amount of money into one electrician or TV repairman's hands, and he sorted it out. But basically, the way it worked was the movie channel, which you'd normally have to pay for access to, was just on all the time for free. So they would, record movies from it, and I feel like rather than this being one I got to see through my nan, who I've said on this podcast in the past, she worked at a video shop called Ava Video, which that's just objectively a great name for a video store in the north of England. And
wait, what was it called? Sorry, I missed that.
Ava Video.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. AVVA. Ava.
That's
Ava Video.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, it's really good.
It would only be better if her name was Ava.
Yeah. yeah, it wasn't, sadly, but that would be good. I used to get videos through her, because she'd get preview copies of the movies prior to them being put on VHS, because they would send a copy to try and convince the staff at the store to buy lots of copies of it to put on their shelves because it'd be a big hit. So they would sometimes send out preview copies with watermarks on and stuff. This wasn't one of the ones I saw that way. This is one of the ones that my unspecified relative had taped with a bunch of just random. They basically just taped a bunch of movies and handed them over with no real attempt to police what the movies were. And very similar to Paul Verhoeven's other movie, RoboCop, where my parents took one look at it and went, yeah, it's a stupid RoboCop. Right, this is clearly like a kid's movie, and then didn't know what the movie contained. I think a similar thing might have happened with Starship Troopers. I think I was obviously older when I saw Starship Troopers than RoboCop. I saw RoboCop very young. I did not know it was the same director. I found that out years later because I was a kid. I was just watching, I wasn't paying attention to names of writers and directors and stuff in the early days. And when I finally figured out they were the same director, I was like, wow, it's so clear. But when I watched it the first time, it absolutely blew me away. I thought it was like, for the wrong reasons, I think. Young Dan enjoyed it for the insane action, the cool special effects. Quite gritty for a science fiction movie, which were traditionally a little bit more sort of Star Wars, like family friendly. To see something that was science fiction, but also like as gory as this and as brutal as this, when a movie like this would normally have been made a little bit, like I said, not completely family friendly necessarily, but certainly would have had less of an edge to it. I really enjoyed this film. It was an absolute classic for me, and I watched it a ton of times. And it was only, and I think a lot of people our age have had this experience with this movie, watching it young, being like, "Oh, what a badass movie!" Then watching it as an adult and being like, "Oh, this is a satire of fascism." Oh, okay. Like realizing that this isn't just a movie about war, but it's a movie satirizing war. And specifically also satirizing the kind of propaganda that American movies often do, where, like the Michael Bay Transformers movies, where the military give him a bunch of equipment so that the movie can have all this military equipment for basically no cost, but at the expense of, hey, maybe make the military look good in this movie. When you think about that sort of propaganda that Hollywood actually does by mythologizing war movies, by mythologizing those who do for their country or whatever, and they actually all ends up becoming, like real like propaganda of a sort. So this movie is amazing because what happens with this movie is you enjoy it on a really sort of surface level as a younger person. And then when you rewatch it as an adult, you see the other side of it and go, "Oh, this movie's even cleverer than I appreciated at the time." And so for me, this remains a masterpiece. I watched it a ton as a kid, and I watched it a ton as an adult. I go back to this movie all the time. I absolutely love it. I refuse to watch the straight-to-DVD sequels. For anyone who's wondering. There's 5 of them now, or 6 of them. I won't watch them. I can't do it. The movie is very precious to me, and its satirical edge is absolutely undoubtedly lost in the sequels. There's no way that's in the sequels. So I can't do it. Fair enough. There was an animated series when I was a kid that I did watch, which is hilarious considering this movie absolutely shouldn't be watched by kids. But there was an animated series.
Does Casper Van Dam come back for any of the sequels or anything like that?
I think all the cast find their way back into the sequels. They even find a way apparently to weave Dina Meyer back in, who played Dizzy in this movie, into one of them, where like it's like a voice recording or a video recording of her.
They not just have the character take a bath and inexplicitly return from the dead?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a shame because they've embedded that into the world. They could have done.
It's true. It's really true. Although in the movie they kind of express they can only really do that with like they don't do that with many people like that because he was specifically chosen to be
yeah.
But yeah, it is crazy she wasn't done. But I guess was she left on the planet's surface? Like was she physically left? That could be the problem.
No, she was given a funeral. She was jetted off into space in a cheap looking.
You're right. They certainly
in a cheap looking wooden coffin.
They Ratha Khan'd her. She got a funeral, and then they were like, they talk about the funeral burial detail. That made me lol really like quite hard because like it's like really dramatic, like Dizzy's death, which hits quite hard. She's a popular character, and then it's like. Burial detail, dismissed. And it's like, wait, there's a burial detail? Like, you've got a burial division, have you, in your army? But yeah, anyway. So I refuse to watch the sequels for anyone asks. So that's my background with the movie. In terms of would I recommend this movie, I know we don't normally get to that so early, but I've already made it very clear. I absolutely would. I love this movie. So with that in mind, and knowing, Chris, that you don't have any history with the movie, and knowing that you first watched it either this morning or yesterday, how are you feeling?
So almost conflicted watching it. Not about whether I was having a good time, because I was having a great time. It felt like I was watching it. It felt like I should have had Troy in our bed next to me. Do you know what I mean? It felt like I was watching one of the movies they watch and sort of joke about in Community.
Like Kick Puncher.
Yeah, it felt like I was watching one of those movies. It felt like I've never seen the show, so it might not be the exact type of movie they do, but it felt like I was in Mystery Science Theater 3000. Do you know what I mean? I was like, this is fucking crazy. So I had a great time watching it, a really great time watching it. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would also recommend it because I think the movie, just more than anything, needs to be seen to be believed. And it's such an assault to the senses when you watch it the first time.
Yes,
you don't know any of that's coming. I've had such a growth because there are points where I'm like, this is not a good, and this is, this wasn't where I landed, but there are points where I'm like, this is not a good movie. Like a guy gets his head blown off, and as they zoom out, they're like, no captain, no team leader for you, Rico. I'm like, what? Dude's head's been blown off.
Right.
But the reason I'm then, thank you, sorry, Jess just brought me a drink. The reason I'm kind of conflicted by the whole thing is because I imagine, I've not looked this up, but I imagine over time the dialogue has changed about this movie, because I'm watching it going, it is incredibly bold and brave, what they do with the propaganda angle, what they do with, and how modern a lot of its points feel. We spoof GB News and Fox News in this movie, and those things weren't particularly. I don't know the history of Fox News. It might have been around in '97, but it's not. It's making a point about those things now in this 1997 movie, and I'm just watching it flabbergasted by that and going, well, I can't deny how effective that is. I can't deny how inventive some of the visuals are, and I can't, like I said, I can't deny that I had an amazing time watching it. But the reason I'm also incredibly conflicted is because I don't know how much all of that stuff makes up for the character issues in this movie, i.e. lack of there's a lot of plot. There's a lot of plot and not a lot of time given to what these characters are feeling. Like I said, Rico dies. He dies, Dan. He dies, and then in 2 scenes later, he's in a big bathtub, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, we brought you back because this guy knows you." And it's never talked about. We don't talk about the impact of that on him. Yeah. We don't delve into that. It's never addressed. There's a scene, and there's all sorts of instances where you're just like, huh? Denise, there's montage, basically that sequence about halfway through, you think everyone's died, partly because, the uniforms mean that often in a battle, you don't know fucking who's who anyway, but I'm like, well, they've killed off Rico, and as far as I was concerned, Dan, they'd killed off Denise Richards because a shitload of fire went towards her face, with seemingly no side of escape, but it's all right because she just reappears with no reference to that and one cut on her face. What? All that fire caused one cut on your face. So I think there's a lot of stuff happening to the characters, and again, I don't want this to become Chris's criticizing. I'm explaining why watching this for the first time I'm conflicted, because I'm not used to the tone of this movie. I'm used to I'm used to movies.
No one's used to the tone of this movie.
I'm used to movies, addressing stuff like, killing off the main character and bringing them back to life. And there's a lot of it's the things that were there for the taking, and sometimes you feel that Rico's a bit of a twat. Like, he literally experiences the pain of saying I love you to someone and them not saying it back, and then he does it to Dizzy. Like, it's like, oh, okay. There's moments where tonally the film, like, his entire family and everyone he knows is destroyed, but the movie, like, 60 seconds later becomes triumphed because he's back in the army. And I know that's making a point. But, like, I'm like, oh, well, we're really not going to deal with how he feels about, all his family dying. There's the point where, the teacher dies, and that's, played quite powerfully. And then, 20 seconds later, we get Dizzy's triumph because she killed the bug. So we go from, like, despair to triumph, and then we loop right back to despair because then that kills Dizzy. And again, I know all of that stuff is in service of the point the movie is making.
Yes.
But it's a real struggle when you watch it the first time to kind of accept that. And I think just to kind of scatter a load of thoughts that we can then pick apart and discuss more. And I think there's also something really interesting I don't know, and I think it's a really interesting discussion. I don't know if satire is the right word. That's why I keep using the phrase "the movie is making a point," because I think the movie is categorically making a point. I mean, Jesus, look at Neil Patrick Harris's costume, like, when he returns. Like, look at how he's dressed. Like the point is clear, people. But whether the movie's a satire, it's hard watching it to. Everything is played with such conviction. Even the dumbest lines in the world are played with such conviction. And there's not, like, there's so many moments where you're like, that plays humorously, but I'm not 100% sure they were going for humour. And maybe it's a wider discussion in satire doesn't need to be funny. But, a satire to me is an all-out and out comedy. This movie is very funny, but it doesn't necessarily feel deliberately funny. Is someone playing a violin behind you? What's happening?
No,
there?
Someone's doing. I don't know. Someone's doing some construction work or something outside. I don't know what's happened. It's been getting louder and louder for the last 5 minutes, and it just. I don't know if they're getting closer and then they're going to go away or what.
No, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I would like to tag in on this point, if that's okay, because I think you're 100% wrong on anything you've said about satire there. I mean, top to bottom. I feel rude saying that, but...
Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm right.
At no point anywhere...
Let me finish. Let me just finish one thought. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying these are all the things that are going round my head, and I'm dropping things. Like I say, I'm dropping things for discussion. Like, I don't know enough about the fucking definition of satire, but how much of that stuff is deliberate and deliberately played for comedy is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think almost all of it. Like, it's all very. I mean, the movie opens with the scene where it's I'm doing my part, and then a child, 8 years old, steps out of the line of troops, holding a gun, wearing the uniform, going, I'm doing my part. And they're all like, ha ha ha. The movie knows exactly what it's doing at all points. The movie is designed as partially a comedy, maybe not an outright comedy, but I think very often satire is played straight. That is part of, I think, the definition of satire is like it's not an overt comedy. The characters aren't aware what they're doing. It's funny, if anything, they're playing it 100% sincere at all times. That's it. To the people of the world of it, it's real, but it's so ridiculous to us, the viewer. And that's how one of the ways in which it will point out the issues. It is ridiculous that in this movie no one is ever promoted through skill. Everyone in this movie that gets a promotion because the person in front of them is murdered. That's not an accident. That's design. You know, the movie is so carefully constructed to be funny and ridiculous. And I even think down to how flippantly they're like, hey, Rico, you're dead. You know, like, that's design. Because I think one of the things that the director of this movie has said since is that one of the things that's a big part of what the subject matter of this movie is that war makes fascists of us all. And I like the idea that, like, these kids get so indoctrinated into this, you know, that they don't even criticize the insane Clandethu plan. Like, so Clandethu, for those who haven't seen the movie, we should do the plot at some point as well, but there's a point when the movie, when following an attack on Earth in Buenos Aires, the US government decide to fight back and go to the home planet of the bugs. And there's a sequence on a planet called Clandethu. That's where they come from. And basically it's a massacre, an absolute massacre on many fronts. They were unprepared for the exact level of defense the bugs had. They were unprepared for the numbers. They sent too few troops. It's just a shit show, top to bottom. Bajillions die. Like, I think they say like 100,000 people die in 60 minutes, and then later on there's a number on the screen of 300,000 deaths, including many ships and bazillions of troops. Right, all that stuff. Right, cool. So we did that, but like then the movie immediately is like, right, let's get back to it. We got, and at no point does a single character go, hey, wait a minute, sorry, are we just doing more of this? Are we just going to keep banging our heads against this? And admittedly, the military slightly changed tact. They're going for, like, outskirt planets that aren't as infested, trying to find these brain bugs to work out how they work so they can fight, whatever. But, like, no one in this movie ever questions an order. Not once. And it's kind of ridiculous. It's insane, actually, that no one at any point...
Yeah, it's mad. Yeah.
No one at any point shows, like, the horrors of what's happening. It's like, yeah, we're in war. That's what we do in war. And it's like very much the design, I think. So I feel very strongly, and I understand why on a first viewing it might not play that way, particularly if you're not like expecting the tone of the movie. I totally understand that, but I think everything in this movie is so careful and so deliberately chosen to be what it is, to be on that sort of comedic edge at all times, because the movie knows it's ridiculous. That's the point, because it's not just lampooning fascist ideologies, it's also, I think, a little bit lampooning America's own weird warmongering ways, you know, their own weird idolization of military service, you know, and movies America produces about the military, making it seem like this heroic, incredible feat. There's, you know, if you go through the pantheon of American war movies, there's a couple that are like realistic, brutal, heartfelt, you know, anti-war, or not even anti-war, but just like showing the horrors of war. But there's a ton of like, I'm a badass soldier doing a great thing, and they're like, you know, very much on the side of like, you know, sort of making it seem like a good thing, you know. Even movies like what was that? The Godzilla movie from like 2014 has like a ton of stuff in it.
I think it's like, just called Godzilla movie. It's just called Godzilla, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is just called. Yeah, it's called Godzilla, and I guess because there's also a Godzilla from '98, and then there's the original Godzilla from Japan. I'm guessing they just call that Godzilla 2014. They could have come up with a different title. Give it some sort of title. Anyway, that movie is full of like not challenging the military, not challenging war, just like, you know, sort of idolizing it almost. So it's, yeah, I think so much of this movie is doing that it's. I would be amazed to discover that it was by accident. It's so very careful. Yeah,
that's fair.
In my experience. Yeah. So but I mean, in terms of all your other criticisms, I mean, yeah, absolutely. It is insane that Rico's just alive again, and that then people die, and then they're moving on. But I also think that's in service of that idea.
Yeah, but like I say, it's and again, like, you know, the point is I'm conflicted. I'm not coming because it's so much. There's so much to take in. Like when you and I went in cold. Like I didn't see a trailer. I went in so cold to this, and I'm like, oh, it's Star Wars. Oh, it's making a point about fascism. Oh, it's a teen movie. Oh, it's this. It's there. Like, is this meant to be funny? Is it not meant to be funny? I don't know what's going on here. Like, so I'm just like, bamboozled. But yeah, it's really weird because it makes that point so strongly. But like, when there's just so much there that's like, oh, but that's an interesting idea. Do you know what I mean? Like, the notion of Denise Richards saying "I love you" to him, and him not saying "I love you," and him being like, "Oh, just say it back," and then later on, he's in the reverse position, and he doesn't say it back. Like, I'm like, that's an interesting idea, but you're not really exploring any characters. And again, like, this is the thing: any point you make like that can be backed with, but it can be argued against with. But in war, they're not. You know what I mean? In war, these people are bodies being used for a service, and that's so often the case in war. Even the lack of character depth and the lack of exploring these things that should be impactful to be explored and should be explored is an argument for the well, it's making the point it's making so effectively, and that's why it's so, I think, difficult. Because also it's not even, there's not even in some cases character stuff. I can't tell you how flawed I was that the fucking villain, and the whole point is, to be fair, and I thought this was, again, another really effective thing about the movie. The movie doesn't end with the war ending. The movie literally ends with a note of, this will help us fight the next 20 years. Like, and that's what
I love as well. It's like, a government run by military people. Guess what? Like, this war will never end. It's designed to not end.
Yeah, and all it is, the great victory is just, we got a bit more information, peeps. Like, okay. And I love that, and I think that's amazing. At the same time, the villain is captured by someone else off screen. Someone we know, a character we've met, a character we'd seen like an hour ago, but they come out of that cave and everyone's celebrating, and I'm like, why are they celebrating? And it's like, we've got him, we've done it. And I'm like, what? The big bad is caught by someone else off screen. That's mad. And that's what I mean. It's just, for me, it's just confliction, because I love the ending. I love the point it's making. I love how effectively it makes that. But at the same time, I almost can't compute. I almost by default go, because, if you'd say to me, you're going to watch a movie where at the end, the big bad, the big, vagina bug monster is caught by, I mean, come on now.
I genuinely, now you say it, I'm like, that is incredible that after all these years I've never thought of it like that, but that is exactly what it is.
There you go.
I
don't know the definition of satire, and Dad doesn't know what a vagina looks like. We're here, people. This is two men. Every day's a learning day on Rewind Reviews. But like that's what I mean about that confliction. Because if you'd have said to me yesterday morning, today you're going to watch a movie, and the villain of that movie, in the end, in the last few minutes of that movie, the villain will be caught by a B character off screen, I'd go, well, that's a bad ending. Like, that's just, you know what I mean? And that's where that confliction comes from. Love the execution. Had a great time watching that ending. I think it makes the point really well. But my brain goes, but that surely has to be a bad thing.
I mean, but do you not think he's? And I know we might be talking ourselves in circles, but I do think, like, in this one, I guess maybe it's just a certain level of trust that the director has earned in me, maybe. But I feel like that's deliberate, right? It's like he's making a deliberate B movie. Like that's the intent, that it's kind of like schlocky and cheesy and doesn't really ever get into the nitty gritty of stuff. And then there's weird beat choices like that. Like that's kind of, is that not kind of part of it?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. And again, it's not even like I accept that as a defense, because I'm not. I can't stress enough, and I think I'm almost going to stress it to the point of whoever's listening to this getting bored. It's not. It doesn't need to be a defense, because I'm not saying it needs defense. I'm saying it's fucking batshit crazy, isn't it? and it makes me go, on the one hand this, on the other hand this, and like I say, what's amazing about this movie is every single criticism you can throw at it, you can literally then turn around and go, yeah, but that's the point. But you think about, I thought about a lot. I thought about Last Action Hero, and I knew that to some degree, because I had these conflictions, I knew that to some degree our roles would be slightly reversed, even though that was a film of your childhood. You hadn't watched it for a while.
Yes.
And there were so many points in that where you're going, this is, and I can't remember exact examples, but my memory of that podcast is that there were things to do with character and tone and stuff like that you were just bamboozled. You were bamboozled by going, this is just fucking nonsensical. And I'm going, yeah, but it's kind of making a point about action movies, and I think it's meant to just be harmless fun. So fuck it. That's kind of the intent, isn't it? And but that wasn't. Do you know what I mean? But you're there going, well, I don't think that's enough. And I think someone could do that with this movie. I think someone could go.
It is funny where the line is for that, though, isn't it? Like, because I always wonder about with stuff like that, when it's like, how much of it is on how much of it is on the filmmaker and how much of it is on the audience, like to sort of like go along with it, like, and also like how much trust do you have to put in with the filmmaker, like, at what point do you think they've got it wrong, and at what point do you think they've sort of like it's deliberate, and it's so hard to find that line, and it's so funny with this, it feels all deliberate. With Last Action Hero, it feels like they were just being lazy in places. Like, I don't know what the line is for why my brain feels that way about one and not the other.
And it's funny because also when you said I don't know where it's funny where the line is, I thought you were going to say.
Sorry.
And
IMDb just started playing a video on the Starship Troopers page at the top.
I thought you were going to say, and I think this is valid as well. It's funny where the line is, where sometimes the point and the purpose being so important might make you forget. Like in like Last Action Hero is making points about action movies. Well, who gives a shit? Starship Troopers is making points about the horrific nature of war. So does your brain, like with Help, which is a TV film we discussed recently on the podcast, awful thing happens at the end, like really kind of we won't bother going into details, but basically a character breaks the fourth wall, and it kind of feels a bit too much like the point is a bit too on the nose. That ruined that film for you. Whereas for me, I was like, yeah, but it did everything else so well, and it made its point so beautifully that I didn't disagree with your criticism. I just didn't care as much. And I don't know if sometimes is it, as well as the line being how deliberate is it, if we're talking Last Action Hero, Starship Troopers, I don't know why I can't say the name of this movie. I think there's also what is it also partly about, well, the point this film's making, the themes are so important and done so well that you also let some of the other stuff slide for that reason too. It's a fascinating film.
I think the other thing with this is it's interesting to compare this to Last Action Hero, because I the more I'm thinking about, like, with this, the thing is, it's not just parodying, like fascism and all these other things. It's also parodying movies that glorify war, like cheesy, over the top action movies, the same as Last Action Hero. And I think the problem was Last Action Hero was supposed to be, quote unquote, in the real world for portions of the movie. And the portions in the real world were equally not functional as portions in the heightened, world inside the film when the kid falls into the film. Whereas it feels like Starship Troopers, you're supposed to be, it's like you're watching one of those cheesy top to bottom. So I feel like that kind of, in its premise, gives you more room for it's all part of the show. so to speak. It's all part of the intentional satire of action movies, where Last Action Hero has a line that it draws. Well, the satire is happening when the kid is inside the movie, because everything else is the real world, right? So I think that's part of it, is that movie is broken either end. Well, not broken, but there are things about it that don't work or don't feel as deliberate either end. Whereas this one, it does. And I do think as well, there's an element of like, all the stuff in this, there's also there's a feel in these that make them like, it's not an accident that you put a child in that first scene, right?
Yeah.
There are things that didn't function about Last Action Hero that felt deliberate. So it's about my ability, my own personal sort of sensibilities in what I feel like the director chose to do and what I feel like they didn't. And I think anyone could easily watch either of these movies and come out the other way based on that, But I also do agree with you. Something you hit on at the beginning that there was, we were talking about like also the value of the message. Last Action Hero as a movie is going, hey, action movies are kind of dumb, right? Right? Whereas I feel like, Starship Troopers has got a really, really serious message about where things might go if we keep glorifying war.
Well, also a message on how... A message, like I said earlier, about, and like you said as well, about the true horror of war. How dispensable these people are, these soldiers are, how it is literally, well, we knew some of you would die for that, but I'm glad to see you weren't one of them. Like, okay.
Yeah, well, that's the other, I don't know if you noticed, but from Rico's original training regiment, so not obviously including Denise Richards' character, Carmen, everyone he goes to training with dies. Except for Ace. Jake Busey's character. Jake Busey is the only remaining person from Rico's first training. Like, he's the only one. And I think what's funny about this as well is I think the choice was to create contrast as well. I think that's what's interesting so much about this movie. Between, I think at one point Verhoeven described it as 90210 with a war setting. So it's a lot of like teenage angst and like love triangles and all that stuff. And the idea is to set something so almost seemingly innocent and childlike. Like some of the plots in this movie could easily just be from a high school movie in terms of like the character interrelationships, but the background isn't, oh, I've got to go to trigonometry. It's, I'm about to go. I'm going to go murder 1,000 bugs. I'm going to blow up a big one with a grenade, and then stand in front of it like looking like a badass. So I think that contrast also feels way cleverer than anything that's being done in Last Action Hero. And I also think as well the where it's being silly and B-movie on purpose also feels like subtler. Like Last Action Hero was like, in action movies, don't you hate it when the guns just never run out of bullets? Whereas, this movie is like, it's doing a much subtler job at that. Like showing like the hero shot of like, but it's so over the top of Johnny landing covered in orange bug goo, and then the bug explodes behind him. Like that's over the top in a very different and less winky way than the Last Action Hero stuff. For sure. So I don't want to get. So I think as a result, though, when Last Action Hero has a cheesy moment where something doesn't work, but the movie's not winking at me while it's doing it, I'm going, well, I don't think that one was deliberate because you winked at the others, whereas this movie winks at nothing. So I'm sort of going like, well, wait a minute, like maybe all of this is part of the show. I don't know. I am myself trying to reconcile that notion because it feels like it shouldn't be so taste based or personal preference based. It feels like I should be able to analyze it more didactically and be able to say this is why this works and this is why this doesn't. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. But I do think that one's a big factor. That whole when it's winking and when it isn't thing. I think that really does.
Yeah, I think
help cover it.
I think you've done that with sort of your thought process over the last few minutes and stuff. And I again, I think a lot of my thing is watching it for the first time because, you say there, this movie doesn't wink at all, and that's great. But I'm sat there watching it going, fucking hell, this movie surely should be winking at me. Like, how can anyone say, like, let's go kill some bugs without winking? Like, and I respect, like I say, I respect the choice. But when you watch it for the first time and it feels so like a movie that would be watched in Community or Mystery Science Theatre, you're sat there going, start winking or wink more or it's crazy.
Yeah, so, I'm glad it doesn't because I feel like that would make it worse.
Oh,
for
so am
me.
I.
But like I it's so funny because I went through the trip for this film and I don't know how to get ahead to the trip, and it'll come up. But I'll read it properly later. But like my understanding is that at the time this movie was being made, the executives at the studio making it kept switching. Like every couple of weeks there was a new executive, and no one ever really got a handle on what was being made with this movie until it was basically done. And it was too late. The movie was made. So I think Verhoeven got really lucky because I do feel there's a part of me that feels like a studio exec might want more winking. But then again, maybe all of this is a moot point, Chris, because maybe we're wrong in the sense of, hey, guess what? Audiences at the time didn't get it. This is a deeply misunderstood film. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. This was a deeply misunderstood film. It was criticized by being, pro-Nazi and pro-war. And it's like, what movie were you watching? Now it seems so obvious. But we're all, as I said, as when I saw it as a kid, I didn't see it as being this big statement movie. It was just like a dumb, disposable, fun action movie, and I enjoyed it for that. But yeah, looking at it now, you go, well, yeah, it's clearly this, and it's not a shocker that they didn't get it. And so arguably, if he's made a masterpiece this way, but. Like many masterpieces, definitely misunderstood in its time, suggesting that more winking might have helped, at least in the moment.
I think what would have, I think that's very fair. I think what would have helped me, because I was also feeling that watching it. I was going, if I'd have watched this as a kid, I'd have loved it, and here's why. Star Wars, even as a kid and thinking about it, wow, is this probably a point now? Even more so. As a kid, I struggled. I watched Star Wars, but didn't love Star Wars until later in life. And I don't think we talked about this on the podcast, but when we reviewed Star Wars. But I think one of the reasons for that was maybe it didn't feel particularly accessible to me as a kid. It felt like there was a wider world with rule. Do you know what I mean? It felt like I didn't really understand who the Jedi were and who the Sith were, and I kind of didn't grasp that, and I was maybe too young, maybe not concentrating enough. I think we talked about that, the not concentrating thing, and I mean that I imagine that's really a point now. Like, God, if you're trying to get a kid into Star Wars, where do you even start now? And they would really feel like that because there literally is all this additional stuff. But my point with that is, I think the reason Starship Troopers would have really caught my imagination, because I did, have a big imagination as a kid. Well, still, Dan and I have talked about our writing backgrounds and the fact that if we don't like a show, Dan and I almost to a fault default to, well, what if they did it this way? What if they did it this way? And almost try and fictionally rewrite it on the spot. It's so nondescript. It's so as simple as there's an army and there's these bug things. And they give you things, so little
bug things bad
that now as an adult I'm watching it going, should probably give us a little bit more than that, surely. But as a kid, I'd have been like, oh great, I can fucking play with these toys in my head. One, I understand it because there's hardly anything to understand, and two, my imagination can run wild with this because it can literally be whatever whatever I want it to be. The movie almost does that. The bugs can do and be whatever they need to be for the scene in question. And I'm not criticizing that, because you never quite know what the bug's going to do, and some amazing visuals come out of that. But like, I think that would have really caught me as a kid. Like, oh, bug's bad. Army fighting. Okay. Right. Well, let's play with this in my head for 4 hours. Like, and you know, I think that it's so weird how that would have really appealed to me as a kid. But again, as an adult, I'm sat there going, how invested in this am I? If I, you know, if there's no nuance. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, and I think
do have
unless you've
got to tag onto that. Cool.
There is something to that, because I remember even as a kid, like one of the first scenes, well, maybe not one of the first scenes, but like an early scene in New Hope. It's Vader, who is like, so far Star Wars at this, you know, 30 minutes into the movie, right? What we've got is like there's bad guys in the big, you know, the white outfits, and they're shooting at these seemingly good guys who are running from them, blah blah blah. But then you get to this scene where like Vader goes into a room full of like various Imperial officers, and I've literally just looked at the dialogue. This is the first time we get a sense of what's actually happening in Star Wars, right? I'm going to read you the dialogue. The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I've just received word that the Emperor has officially dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic has been swept away. That's impossible. How will the Emperor maintain control without bureaucracy? The regional governors now have direct control over territories. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station. What's happening? What's an old Republic? There's an Emperor. There's a council that's been dissolved. Regional governors have control of things now. Immediately he's talking about a wider world, and they don't bother explaining any of it at all. And I just think while my kid brain, I suspect that just went over my head, didn't care, enjoyed Star Wars for what it was, right? But I think you know, there is an element of these. There's something to. I think there's something to be said for the different kinds of science fiction movies you can have. The kind where there's tons of little breadcrumbs for a big, massive, complex world, or the kind where it's dumb as a bag of bricks. There's no explanations for anything. Just, you know, look, bugs bad, humans good, I guess. But that's again in this particular case, again, that's intentional because of the satire of the way that war propaganda works, which always tells you the enemy is the bad guy because they're dumb and ugly or whatever. Like, you know, like that simplification of the war and the reasons for it is actually deliberate in Starship Troopers, because that's what happens to soldiers. They're not given the complex details. In this movie, none of these characters really understand what it is they're fighting and why, and they're never really told. So we're not told as the audience because we're in that situation. But yeah, in general, there's definitely room for dumb science fiction movies that don't really bother doing that stuff.
But what we are told to start kind of, because we've been like quite high level so far, to sort of go into some of the finer details. What we are told, what we are shown, is the literal propaganda. Is the decision to constantly cut to the propaganda, to cut to what this world is seeing and engaging with, is so effective. Such an effective narrative decision. Feels like quite a bold narrative decision, because, you know, they do it so much, and they also do it without, you know, a less bold, a less brave version of that is a character's watching TV and we zoom in on the TV. No, this movie doesn't do any of that. This movie just from the off is like, here you go, this is it, and you work out what it is as we go. And that's like an incredibly brave decision, I think, on the part of the script and the editing and all that stuff, and so effective. You're just like, well, this is what that world's engaging with. Yeah. Of course, it's ended up like this, and like I say, that sort of modern take of how well it spoofs what we're seeing now. Right. and you know, this was 1997, and you're like, oh god, that feels familiar.
And I think what's funny about it is, like, you almost don't notice it like shifting the characters too. So like, Johnny in the start of the movie isn't even that interested in the war or the citizenship. He basically gets into it for a girl. But by the end of the movie, he's Joe military. He's like career military guy, become a lieutenant or whatever. Rico's Roughnecks. It's all, he's like leading a squad, and he's like properly indoctrinated into this insanity. Even though his original plan is like, yeah, I'll serve for a couple of years and then I'll come home with a citizenship and I'll be a more respectable member of society. Blah blah blah. Like, and he's saying that to his parents, but really he's going to chase the girl. And I think watching that happen alongside all these propaganda films, you sort of, it all sort of works together really well. I would argue we talked a lot during RoboCop about the inserts, the news clips, all that stuff, and how they both are funny and weird, because it was like news clips and adverts. I don't know if you remember them that well, but there's a bunch of that stuff. And we talked about whether they interrupted the flow of the movie too much. How much information do you really get out of them? What were they adding to it? Like we discussed the value of those and the way they affect the pacing a fair bit. I think this is a better execution of that idea personally, and I love the ones in RoboCop. There's so many amazing little inserts in that movie. These ones are more focused. There aren't any like random adverts that are literally nothing to do with the plot. Every single one gives you some sort of information about the world. Every single one leans into the propaganda element. They're always very short, and they always end on that, do you want to know more? Which I love so much, because it's like, I don't know, and again, this might be an accident, but in a world now where people just read the headline and move on to the next thing, the fact that each one ends with, would you like to know more? Or do you want to know more? And then it just moves on to the next one. As if the viewer whose eyes we're seeing this through is never choosing to find out more.
Yeah, because how many times has someone in a modern society given an opinion or fact, and you discover it comes from seeing the headline when scrolling through social media? Like, yes. It's crazy how relevant that is. To keep diving into very specifics, Disney...
Very quickly before we move on, I had a question about those inserts. Did you feel they affected the pacing of this movie, or because because we talked about that with RoboCop, I'm curious on your thoughts on that here, because in RoboCop you very much felt, particularly you felt there was one too many inserts. You thought there was one in the third act that kind of bothered you in its placement, because you thought it kind of interrupted the movie escalating. How did you feel about their use in this one, and in terms of how they affect the narrative going forward?
No, because it didn't bother me at all. And actually, I, as critical as I've been on this movie, and I've criticised things in bigger ways, I would sit down and watch this movie again over RoboCop any day of the week. Yeah, I know, and I know it's not probably a popular opinion, because so many people think RoboCop is a perfect movie, and I'm just not sure it earns the perfect title as much as Die Hard, and there will be people that feel the opposite, which is absolutely fair enough. It's very subjective.
Or the real answer, Chris, Groundhog Day.
Yeah. Groundhog Day, also a perfect movie, and I think of the ones we've done on here, we also put that title to Back to the Future as well. Because I think there's a few reasons. One, I think again, as stated, any criticism of this film can be defended with it's in service to the point it's making, and I think this is it's incredibly in service to the point it's making here. Two, a lot of this movie is any kind of character work that is done is hooked on. Yeah, a lot of time has passed. Dizzy and Rico are close, and Dizzy's my next point. Dizzy and Rico are closer now. Yeah, well, a lot of time has passed. This team has bonded now. Yeah, well, a lot of time has passed. Denise Richards is now a captain. We've a lot of stuff. There's like a lot of hand waving of that development happened off screen as time has moved forward. So I think inherently, if you've got a film that is naturally jumping through time anyway and telling a story that spans a long time, or what is probably actually a frighteningly short time. Again, the point the movie's making. Those inserts are always going to interrupt the flow less because, you know, in RoboCop, you're putting those. I can't. My memory is not great on RoboCop, but I assume you're putting those inserts in between a scene set in the morning and then the next scene, which is set later that day, or, you know, in the evening. Whereas with this, those inserts might come, you know, in between years, or, you know, they might come, you know, it doesn't. So much of this, how I think if you were to track this movie, even the bits that are set in the same time period, you know. You've got Neil Patrick Harris and Casper Van Dien doing mind control, and then they're at the ball. Well, there's probably dialogue about this, but we don't know when that ball is. Like, there's very few scenes in this movie that follow each other that chronologically. Do you know what I mean by that? Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, even at the beginning, you're like, we're going to sign up, and the next scene is them signing up. Well, that hasn't necessarily happened the very next day. Whereas RoboCop is like, this is what's happening to this person.
It takes place over. Chronologically, it's all much closer to itself. Like, yeah, absolutely. It's a sort of concurrent plot rather than a movie spanning several years.
Yeah, so I think inherently those inserts interrupt it less because you're not interrupting a scene. You're not interrupting action because of the movie's flow of time and the way the movie's using that. So no, I didn't feel that same issue.
I do think I'd need to compare them. I suspect these ones are shorter than the RoboCop ones too. I'd have to check that, but I very much got the feeling when watching it this time, because I was kind of looking out for it, because I remembered our discussion on it from RoboCop.
I can't remember them in RoboCop that well, to be honest. So Dizzy. Is Dizzy, Dan, one of the most tragic, and I'm aware, again, I'm full of contradictions this week. I know that. I'm owning that. My literal headline thought of this movie was, I'm very conflicted. So of course I'm full of contradictions. But even though I've complained about, you know, a lack of character arcs, a lack of character stuff, I'm going to say this next sentence. Is Dizzy one of the most tragic character arcs you've ever seen in a film? Because here's the thing. Dizzy does the same thing as Rico. You know, we get the impression maybe she certainly can fight well and all of that stuff, but she specifically asked to be transferred to that unit. She knows he's signing up. She indicates at school and at the ball that she has feelings for him. She goes into war for him, as Rico did. Except Rico is rejected, and so he knows where he stands with... What is the name of Denise Richards' character? I can't keep calling her Denise Richards. Tarman. He knows where he stands with Tarman. He's told fairly early on where he stands with Tarman. He has time to process that, get over it. He's not kept hanging on. Whereas Dizzy is arguably kept hanging on. Maybe not so much by Rico. Rico's quite firm with her that, you know, he's not interested. But, you know, she's still longing for him the entire movie.
Yes.
Also, Rico gets to live, whereas she dies, and in the scene where they get together because Hank from it's Hank from Breaking Bad. Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, I know it's Hank from Breaking Bad, but I was trying to work out whether it was that character or one of the other.
No, Hank... I think it's the teacher. It's the teacher from the early part of the movie when he comes back. Because you know, General Teacher gives them an extra 10 minutes in quite a creepy moment. He seems very invested in those two getting together. It's the only I think, you know, to be fair, there's quite a sweet moment built into that, which is when he says something to Rico. Of course. What does he say to Rico? It says he says something like, never turn down a good
something
thing.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Turn down a good thing. And I like that moment. I thought it was sweet, but also you kind of go, "Ooh, like he used to be their teacher, and now he's like, have an extra 10 minutes to bone, kids, on me." Like, it doesn't matter if people die. Don't worry about it. You guys You guys get together.
Well, yeah, but see, I see. Okay, so just to insert again, I thought that was actually weirdly sweet because it's basically him being like, "You guys might die in an hour." Like, I don't even think that's him. I don't even think that's him being leery. I think that's him just being like, "Yeah, you kids literally might be dead tomorrow. You might as well get laid now. Take something good out of what is about to be a very horrific situation."
I'm making the point in a very different tone to like my complaint about Rico getting revitalized by a bath and it never getting addressed. Like, I'm making it like a joke. Like, I find that less egregious, like the whole 10 minutes and because especially I agree with you that don't turn down a good thing is a really nice moment. But anyway, so they get together. But he doesn't say I love you back. He literally does what Tarmin does to him. Mm-hmm. And then she dies, and in the big speech in front of Tarmin, the opportunity to sort of acknowledge her, he calls her, even in death, after they've slept together, he calls her his friend. Like, and then at the end, it's all happy. The gang, like the three friends forever, are three friends in war, and she's basically forgotten about. It's such a tragic arc. I feel so sorry for that character, and she's fucking brilliant. Like, she's shown to be a great fighter, a great strategic thinker. She's brave. Like, she's phenomenal. And she gets treated so poorly by him and the world. And I think the fact that, like I say, the fact that we have two people that go into war for love, and one of them kind of becomes victorious, in the end, and, there's no indication particularly that they're going to get back together, and I would like to think they don't. But he's still, his happy beginning, literally... The movie ends on the note of the three of them arm in arm, same positions. Well, I don't know if they're in exactly the same positions, but it's echoing that scene. Like, so he's kind of victorious, whereas she goes in for love and has the complete opposite experience and loses her life and doesn't even really. The fact that she dies saying, I got you. No, you didn't. Like, it's misinformed. She didn't have him. It's so tragic. It's so unbelievably tragic.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that is like that is again design. I think the character is supposed to be tragic. And I think she I've got to give this movie a lot of credit for actually its depiction of women in general, because I even Carmen, who apparently test audiences did not care for, they found her to be I don't know, playing with Rico's heart, I guess. And I think in an earlier version of the movie, there's a scene where she kisses the other guy, which made people really dislike her. And I think they took that out. But what I think is really good about Carmen is she honestly is just like someone who's like, no, I'm not going to just make life choices based on some guy. I've got a career I want, things I want for myself, and I'm going to go get them. I'm going to be honest with you about that and say now. Like, so she sends him that video, like, to quote unquote break up with him, and everyone, and that she did the right thing. She they tried to make it work. It wasn't working for her. She knew she was going to go career. Fair play. You go for your career. Absolutely fine. Very much allowed. So I think this movie does a really good job of it certainly passes the Bechdel test, separate to that. So I think both the female characters in this movie are depicted really, really well. Dizzy's echoing of Johnny's situation is such a clever choice. Because it's like no one's learning anything about anything from anyone here. Like, Rico does not see the irony at all in his treatment of Dizzy in this movie. And that's kind of amazing. But at the same time, while there's something very tragic about her story, it does feel weirdly honest. It does feel really potentially true to life. I unrequited love, or partially requited love, whatever you want to call whatever happens between those characters, is I suspect pretty common, and I think a lot of people will relate to that story. But I also think, again, that story with the background of war is just so much more that contrast is so much. It sort of makes everything more heightened as well. So yeah, I really, really, really loved that whole storyline and both those characters. I think both Dizzy and Carmen are two sort of really interesting portrayals, and I think both performed really well as well. I should say, like, from an acting standpoint, this movie's got loads of really great performances in it, but I think Denise Richards and Dina Meyer do a great job at bringing those characters to life. So yeah, I 100% agree with everything you said, and I feel like she probably is one of the more tragic characters. Like, she's certainly one of those tragic characters. She's certainly the most tragic character in this movie. She's deeply mistreated.
I think so, yeah.
She's deeply mistreated, then dies. You know,
and then even in death, whilst yes, she gets a funeral. Yeah. And it is, you know, she did even that in some degree. I was literally watching it going, are you giving her a funeral just because you happen to have the body? Like, the general,
what about the 300,000 people that died? Did they all get funerals like this?
Well, and especially in her instance, like the captain, like or the general, the colonel, whatever his title was, the big boss had died moments before, and you'd think surely they'd by tradition or whatever, it would be him that would get the funeral. But anyway, that's a
unless the whole thing is that multiple people got the funerals, which could very well be it. Like they did a funeral for everyone, I guess.
But even in death, him saying she was my friend,
yes,
is so insulting, considering her last words. Her last words were, "In the end, I had you. I got you." It's so like I say, it's so tragic.
But one thing I will say on that is there's a kind of weird irony there. Is that, like, in a way, he gave her the gift of dying, thinking she'd succeeded, that she'd won, that she had him, regardless of whether that was true, and that she couldn't see that it probably wasn't. There's,
No, I think if he'd said in that moment, "I love you" or something, he was giving her that gift. I don't think not correcting her is giving her the gift.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, actually, I think you'll find.
What are some of your deep dives? Some of your specifics you want to talk about? My big ones.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like, character stuff, because we it's funny because often, like, we do, like, I'm the character guy. I'm the guy that's like, I want the characters to work, and if they don't work, how do I care about anything that's happening to them? I always think that's funny when we do one of these. Like, I always find that the only times I'm ever going to lay those rules to the side are movies like this, when the movie is sort of designed to be not. It's hard to. I don't even know how to explain what I'm saying. When the movie has got this weird heightened tone, where it's almost so exaggerated on purpose that it's like the best you're ever going to get in a character arc is just someone, like, saying how they feel very quickly to another character. So it's funny how that will be enough for me in a movie with a tone like this. But in a movie,
sorry to interrupt. You never know with those things, do you? Whether that's, I mean, Last Action Hero would suggest that's not partly a knowledge and nostalgia thing, because you felt very nostalgic about that film and you were more critical of it than I was. But I'd be fascinated, absolutely fascinated, to portal gun to Rick and Morty portal gun to a world where you went into this movie completely blind, and I was the one that watched it as a kid, knew the background, do you know what I mean? Where our roles were truly reversed. Right.
Am I forgiving it through nostalgia?
Yeah, just in general, but also knowledge. Like, do you know what I mean? Some of the stuff I was conflicted on or criticizing. Part of the defense was, you saying sentences like, "I think the director has said this," or "people felt this way, but actually, in time it's come to mean this." All of that knowledge combines into it. I'd be so fascinated to see, if literally, basically, the roles would literally be reversed. You'd be saying the things I'm saying, I'd be saying the things you're saying. Neither of us disagreeing with each other because, you know, I wondered whether we would disagree, but actually I think because I think it's. I tell you what. I tell you what is a really good thing. I think it's a really good thing that I watched the movie last night. Like sitting with the movie and going, well, actually, like you know, Dizzy's. I think if we'd have reviewed this straight after watching, if I'd have watched it this morning and then we'd have reviewed this straight after, I'd be sat here going, you know, Dizzy's a bit. You know, I wouldn't be saying the nuance of Dizzy's story is brilliant. Yeah, I'd be saying she's underserved as a character. I wouldn't be saying she has one of the most tragic character arcs I've ever seen, and it's actually very powerful. Yeah. And I wonder, you know, like I say, I'd be very
and that's done in a movie where everyone's sort of emotions are basically explained in like one-line dialogue. Like I guess it's about subtlety. Like I think in a movie that's not trying to be subtle, characters walk into scenes and tell each other how they feel. And then there's movies that are, you know, I'm picking a movie I saw really recently, something like The Banshees of Inisherin, which is a film that came out this year with Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell. Everyone should see it. It's on Disney Plus in the UK. If you've not seen it, you should absolutely see it. It's very good. But that movie, the characters talk about how they feel, but it's not overt. You have to imply how they're feeling from the things they're saying to each other. You have to do the digging. It's subtext, right? In a movie like that, I expect character work to be more complex, more intricate. You know, characters that are, multi-dimensional, have lots of different thoughts and feelings. In a movie like this, I'm okay with the character having that one sort of like feeling that they're feeling throughout the movie, you know, and you know, something like with Dizzy and this, you're right, it's not particularly complicated, and I guess on an initial view you go like, there's not much to it, these characters, but actually when you look at what happens to the character and compare, when you take that very simple feeling that character has and then you put it in this plot, like you can actually make a really tragic, very poignant, powerful arc with it, even if it doesn't have the subtlety or the dimensions of something more complex. You can still achieve that with it. But you're absolutely right. In a world where I don't bring in my knowledge to it, you know, maybe I feel differently. And even having to sit with it. But I think, interestingly, having to sit with it is maybe a really important element of this movie. You know, it's history as people sitting with it and learning that it's actually way cleverer than they may have initially given it credit for. So, you know, maybe you've just gone through a mini version of what many people who viewed this movie initially experienced across the years.
Yeah, I think my review is different having watched it yesterday and not this morning. And I think, you know, if I'd watched it a week ago, my review would be different as well.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I think, like, what's nuts is I'd be willing to watch it again and show it to Jess and and debate it with her, because Jess's reaction would be like, this is fucking madness. And I'd be going, yeah, but what about the nuances? And she'd be like, I don't care. And I'd be like, fair enough. And you know, I imagine that is also a lot of people's experience.
But again, maybe with some time, she would come to see what it is. Because again, I think I just audiences that first watched it and decided that it was just a dumb, pointless action movie that didn't really have much to say for itself. You know, that it was glorifying war and all that stuff. They know, they're not wrong. That's how they felt about it. It's not, you know, when you're saying that's how I felt about the movie, you can't be wrong about that. That's what they witnessed, you know. Whether that was the intention of the director or not is a different debate. But like the way an audience perceives your movie is out of your control as a filmmaker, right? And like, you know, in the case of this one, audiences definitely didn't initially understand what he was going for. And you could argue, I think it's the director's responsibility to communicate the idea clearly enough. But I think as well there's an element of maybe the movie was just a little ahead of its time. You know, maybe audiences weren't ready for that. You know, I think maybe there's a little bit of that here. You know, so yeah, I just think it'll be really interesting. to see, like, if we, in a couple of years' time, we come back to this one, not to rewatch or anything, but just have it, just between us, not even on the podcast. And I'd just be curious to see how you feel about it then, thinking back to it.
I'll be honest with you, mate. I'm not adverse to watching the sequels.
Right.
I don't. I'd like, just for my own morbid curiosity. I know you never want to watch them, and I'm not saying I'll pick them for this, but
yeah, please don't. I've avoided them my entire life. Like I just can't do it. If they're, oh god, I'm just so worried that they're going to be sequels to the movie everyone thinks this movie is. Does that make sense?
But do you think, because there is a world, right, where it's weird though, isn't it? Because if you were going to make a TV show of this, and I don't want to talk about this too long, because I don't want to fucking 2.5, 3 hour long podcast, and I'm conscious that, like, we've still got things to drill into, especially my big things to drill into. I feel like we've covered, but I'm sure you've got a list, so I almost don't want to talk about this too long. But I feel like it's weird, isn't it? Because if someone were to say to me, you gotta reboot this, you gotta retell it, what are you doing? I'm, one, immediately going TV show, and two, I think I'm going full out drama. I don't think I'm doing the comedy stuff or the kind of I'm not doing people's heads imploding and people reacting in kind of a sort of way. I think the dramatic telling of it would be my preferred route. I don't think you could sustain this sort of bizarre no winking. I think you'd have to wink, and I don't want to wink. So if I don't want to wink, I'm probably going for a more dramatic version of it across 10 episodes. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would not do that. I think the reason this movie's message hit so hard is because of that weird tone, and I think you would lose something pretty significant if you took the sort of the no winking comedy out of it. I think it has to almost be cheesy, because again, remember, what's great for me, at least, about this property, about this product, is it's not just a parody of fascism, it's a parody of other movies doing this, and I think you can only do that with that, like, weird tone and that long. So I would, if you had to approach it, I would still approach it with this exact same tone.
I think I'm less bothered about keeping that. I like that element, but I think if we're getting if I have to get rid of that element to tell a fascinating story about someone who went into war purely for love and ended up but
then don't reboot Starship Troopers as a TV series. Then in that case, make something else.
But I want Big Bugs, Dan.
You can put Big Bugs. Big Bugs aren't copyrighted.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
I mean, I genuinely, like, it's that would be so far away from what this is to my brain that I would be like, just call it something else. It's fine. I'm also interested in the thing you're describing, but if it had the Starship Troopers label slapped on it, then I've got certain expectations. And I think it's a fascinating world with lots of potential for drilling into. I mean, the first thing you learn about this world when the movie starts is, it's a world where democracy was basically put aside because veterans took over, decided we were being too namby-pamby, closed down democracy. We're shutting democracy. The military's running this shtick now, and we end up in a more militaristic society where basically the only people who can vote are people who are enlisted. You can only have a baby if you're given a license, and to get a license you need to be a citizen. You don't get citizenship until you've gone to war. That's
pretty fucked up.
That's crazy, and the way this movie just like hand waves that entirely away is amazing to me, because that is a really interesting, complex idea. But the movie's going, well, wait, no, because they're militaristic. All they want to do is, I think. Let me see if I can find the quote. There's a really good quote from the director about this. Let me see if I can find it very quickly. It might be in my trivia now. Let me just see very quickly. Oh man, where is it? Because basically he was like, I think this might be someone retelling something he said to them rather than it actually being like an official quote from the director, but I think it was Clancy Brown who's in this movie. Yeah, okay. So in a 2014 interview on the Adam Carolla show, Michael Ironside, who read the book as a youth, had actually asked director Paul Verhoeven, who'd grown up in Nazi-occupied Netherlands, why are you doing a fascist movie? Because the book is a let's just say the book is questionable. We'll come to the book that it's based on. I say based on. It's not really based on. We'll talk about that too. Verhoeven apparently said, if I tell the world that a right-wing fascist way of doing things doesn't work, then no one will listen to me. So I was going to make a perfect fascist world where everyone is beautiful, everything is shiny, and everyone has big guns and fancy ships, but the entire world is only good for one thing, killing bugs. That is an incredible quote that says so much about his viewpoint on this entire movie, which is just what they've done is they've created a society that is literally good at war and nothing else. And so to hand wave it almost away a more interesting backstory or a more complex like political structure, to go like, well, we're not actually going to talk about that because actually there's nothing to say about that. What they've done is they've gone military and that's all they're going to do now. They are a war factory. And that is all this society achieves.
Yeah, because it's funny, because you kind of want to dig into, like, his parents have him, so presumably these two anti-Federation people did fight, did become citizens that way. Like,
that's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, because I was under the impression his parents did not have citizenship. But yeah. Maybe because they had money. They were rich. I wonder if they bought their way into a license to have a kid. Fascinating.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And again, it's for me, it's that kind of thing I would want to explore in a longer version of this personally. Right.
But yeah, but 100%. But I understand the desire for that. But again, I do like the way the movie does the way it does it the way it does. And I wouldn't want I wouldn't want to lose the jokes. Like when the guy says, "Good for you, the infantry made me the man I am today," and he's like, he's got one arm, no legs, with the other arm gone.
And I will say
he's
that
got a robot arm and he's shaking the robot hand as he says it. It's so good.
I will say, like, this movie is so. I think what this movie does better than. In a way, one of the most comparable movies, instead of like, and again, I don't think we should necessarily go talk about this for half an hour either, but in a way, never mind Last Action Hero, one of the movies to really compare this to of modern times of recent times is Don't Look Up. And I think this movie makes its point and could convert. Okay, maybe not makes its point clearer, but and we discussed this in a review. A particular challenge that I personally, and I know a few others, had with Don't Look Up is that sense of, is it converting anyone, or is it simply, in terms of its message, preaching to the converted, and anyone watching it is already on board. To which I think you presented
I don't think
the
that's
very
necessarily
valid argument
a point of the movie though. Like that's people hear, oh, it's an environmental message, and just don't watch it.
Yeah, I believe you made. That's what I was just about to say. I believe you made the fair argument on the podcast of, well, they're not even watching the movie anyway. Like you're never going to win them because you're not even going to get them to watch the movie. Right. Yeah. But regardless of that specific, of those specifics. I think this movie could convert someone more than Don't Look Up could. I think this movie could maybe not convert, but open someone's eyes in a more overt, because it's so over, like the scene you were just describing. The point of that scene cannot be in any way misunderstood. It is very clear what that scene is going for. Like I said earlier, it's kind of, I understand completely why people misunderstood it when it first came out, but you do also go, Neil, look at how Neil Patrick Harris is dressed, people.
Yes, we'll come back to that. But yes, agreed. And I think
the point is clear.
There's a truth to that, but I think also, actually, it's the winking thing again. Because I actually think the problem with Don't Look Up is winking all the time. Get it? Get it? And I think that puts people off. Whereas this movie, no winking, tries to play it sincere, but the message is clear. So unfortunately, it's that same thing. The lack of the winking is actually what makes this movie so powerful. And if you were to lose those kind of jokes and those kind of moments, I think it would actually harm the movie's message and its ability to convey that message. And I do agree with you. Don't Look Up is so overtly what it is that those people won't even watch it. Whereas Starship Troopers just is like a fun action movie on the surface. If you see the trailer, you're like, oh, I'll watch Starship Troopers. It just looks like a kind of old sort of retro, sort of gory space fighting movie. I'll watch that, and then it's got this message sort of bundled in. Whereas it feels like Don't Look Up exists for its message. Whereas this movie feels like it's actually pretty concerned with whether you're entertained too. Like, first and foremost.
Yes, yeah.
The message is secondary. Whereas Don't Look Up feels like message came first, entertainment came second, because we've both talked about, when we reviewed Don't Look Up, the middle section of that movie having all sorts of problems, and there was some structural stuff and some pacing stuff. Because the movie was too busy wanting to reinforce its message, it didn't think too much about how entertaining it was in places, and I think that was a big part of why of elements of why there were flaws in that movie. So yeah, I 100% agree that this movie is probably more effective making its message there by hiding it slightly in terms of, on the surface, the movie might not seem like it's overtly got a position. It might seem like a dumb action movie to a passerby until they actually sit down and watch it. So yeah, for sure, because you've got to trick people into watching the thing, right? It's the only way you're going to do it. And how you do that, entertain them, and then slip the message in.
What are some of your details? What are some of your notes?
It's little things about the world that I thought were really good. I like the way that we learned about the world through these tiny little fragments. Like one of my favorite of the inserts, where I wrote down, "More news: a murderer was captured this morning and tried today. Sentencing tonight at 6." The idea that a guy was captured for murder, tried that afternoon, and then was going to be murdered that night was so good.
And you've missed a detail as well. Not just. I think you mentioned that it was, airing, but it was airing on all channels.
Yeah,
which again is a really subtle. It's a really subtle decision that says an awful lot about the world.
Yeah, and then immediately they've got a scene where a bug is eating a cow and it's censored, and then it cuts to a field full of dead bodies, not censored at all. Like, they showed so much gore in the very next shot, but they'd censored the cow. Such a great choice. Like, the idea that, like, maybe PETA were, like, complaining about the cow gore, but the people gore absolutely fine in this world.
Yeah, exactly.
I do love how exaggerated the military is in this movie. The pain is in your mind. All that stuff is fucking great. One of my favorite characters in this movie, because he's totally subverting a stereotype, Ace. I want to talk briefly about Ace. Ace is the character played by Busey. What's his first name? I always forget his name. The other Busey, not the Gary Busey, the one Jake Busey. And he starts, you think he's going to be like a traditional like bully type character. He like cuts in line, and him and Rico are like staring each other down. He's like, "Get back of the line, wait your turn." And he's like, well, yeah, you're going to stand up to me, you big man. And he's like, "Hey, we should be friends." And then they're immediately friends. And even though he's got that bravado, that typical like bully attitude that's a big part of his character, he's actually an absolute sweetheart. He's the one that comforts Rico when Rico finds out the girl is dumping him, basically. I love Ace. Ace is one of my favorite characters in the whole movie. He's really good. He plays the violin, which is just like used for hilarity and weirdness in all sorts of scenes of the movie. It's great. I really like it. And he also has one of the most brutal scenes in the movie, which is the put your hand on the wall scene. Down in a few.
Jesus. Yeah,
there's a scene where he says to his officer, like, why are we learning to, do this sort of thing, fight with, throw knives and stuff, it's all nukes anyway, it's all about pushing buttons. He's like, put your hand on the wall. He throws a knife through his hand. He's like, yeah, push a button now. Just a great scene.
So good.
Deeply gory. We should talk about the gore in general. I like the use of gore in this movie. It's so over the top, like it was in RoboCop, and I think Verhoeven just likes that in general, but I think it really... this movie is really like a perfect culmination of Verhoeven's like weird tendencies, because in RoboCop sometimes the gore felt unnecessary, whereas here it all feels like it lends to his message. I don't know if you felt the same way, because it's a deeply gory film, top to bottom.
Yeah, I'd say the same, and I think it's that horror of war thing, isn't it? It's so casual, you know, the casual way we see legs blown up and we see so much blood, and interestingly, like, because we've not even talked about this, but I like the way they kind of use blood and the goo, like it's the, you know, how we see the villains, the other side, we see their blood in almost equal measure. We see all that goo. We see the true horror of war is being shown on both sides. And the thing I was saying, oh man, we've not even talked about this, is the notion that also the theme of this movie, and it's quite subtle, but they hint at, well, we took over their planets. There's probably a version
we
where
were the invading force.
Yeah, there's a version of this where you could play it from their point of view, and we don't come off. We're the bad guys, you know. There's that great David Mitchell and Webb sketch, you know.
Yeah, and keep in mind the big end glory point of the movie. The thing that everyone cheers in is the happy ending. Is Neil Patrick Harris using his psychic powers to tell you the enemy is afraid. This creature we've captured, they're afraid. Hey, we won! They're afraid of us. It's such an insanely powerful piece like that. Every time that they cheer it, they're afraid, my mind melts. Well, I guess it probably didn't when I was a kid, but as an adult, every time I've seen this movie, I cannot believe how.
Yeah, as a kid, you're like, "Fuck yeah, way!"
Yeah, as a kid, I jumped up and down like, they've won, you know, I guess. I don't know. I don't remember. But yeah, I assume I just saw that as a victory. But actually, when you realise that what they're cheering is another being afraid for its life, it's like, oh, shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
powerful.
We've got the, you know,
so, yes, I thought
even like the helmet scene, the malfunctioning helmet.
Oh, insane. I will say, though, so I thought that I did think the comic, the kind of, you're no longer the general, as I already indicated, I did think that element of that scene was ridiculous. We almost needed to stay on the drama too long, but that wouldn't have been in keeping with the movie. Going back to the gore, I will say, though, especially during that midpoint battle, the battle we start with and then build our way back to.
Yes. The invasion of the Clan Death.
Yes, I love the gore. I thought some of the visuals on that were amazing. I thought, and when I say love the gore, I love how impactful the gore made it all. I think some of the visuals are great. It was particularly hard to follow who the fuck was who. There was literally a point where I was like, have they just killed off everyone in this movie? And I think it's a combination of the fact that they're all dressed exactly the same, but also the fact that they literally do appear to kill everyone off. They do kill Rico. As I mentioned earlier, I don't see how Denise Richards' character survives the flames going towards her. So it's kind of like, not only is it already fairly difficult to work out who's who. Again, I think that's the point. Like that age-old defense of this movie.
Disposable soldiers. They're all just numbers. They might die, they might not. Who cares? Yeah,
exactly. Everyone's disposable, so it doesn't. You know, you can't follow everyone because you wouldn't on a battlefield. You wouldn't be able to work out if the people you knew had gone. It's very deliberate. But it did make as a set piece. I was a bit like, wait, what the fuck's happening?
Do you think that's particularly true in the Clan Deathu sequence? Because it's night. Because we have there's a couple of different key battles that happen in this movie. So there's the Clan Deathu sequence, which is the first humans boldly going into the bug territory following the attack on Buenos Aires, which I want to come back to in a minute. Actually, I've got some stuff to talk about on that. But they barrel in for revenge, essentially, and are absolutely outmatched, outnumbered, and it's a massacre, right? Whereas later on we have the outpost action sequence, which is day, well lit, and I could follow who everyone was in that sequence.
Well, I think it's because it's at night, but it's also because at that point we've got a whole squad. We know and are kind of following 6, 7 characters or whatever that are all out there and all fighting, and even in space, we know 3 characters that are being attacked and are fighting. By the time you go to those day battles later on, we're also down to really only about 4 people we need to keep track of in the first place.
Right. Yeah, that could be it. That could be it. Because I was kind of thinking, like, the idea being, like, there isn't supposed to be tension to the Clandethu sequence, because that is just they lose. So it's not like you need to follow the battle. You're just watching scene after scene of someone losing, someone dying, someone, not making it. So whereas the Outpost sequence is designed to be clearer for who to follow, because in that, the tension is, will they escape? Will they get away? Will they win this one? Whereas the previous sequence, the point isn't really to create will they win, won't they tension. It's about just watch them get slaughtered, because that's the point of the scene. So I was wondering if, like, there was some potentially deliberate choices there, but I'm not certain on that. That could just be coincidence. But I do agree with your criticism about the Rico stuff, because there's a part of me then that watches the rest of the movie going, well, if he dies again, could they just stick him back in the tank? Could they just? Well,
it's how I felt a little bit with Dizzy, to be honest.
Right. Did you think they were going to bring Dizzy back then?
No, I didn't think they were going to, but I felt they could, which gave it slightly less jeopardy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think that's fair. So yeah, I do think there's some interesting elements there, because I do wonder about his selection of which scenes, because I actually thought particularly that Outpost sequence was really well done. I understood the stakes. I understood where everyone was. I understood the layout. Like, the only thing I'll tell you what, Chris, though, very quickly, hop a bus. We're just popping over just 2 stops. We're heading over to Nitpick Corner. I'll be there with you.
Oh, great! Let's ring the bell. Let's hop off.
Yeah. So there's a moment when they're on the top of the wall of the outpost, right? And we get this really horrifying shot of just how many bugs are coming towards them. It's thousands. Hundreds of thousands, maybe, right? Now, those bugs had already, in an earlier scene, been coming at them, and because they were being shot at the wall, the bodies were piling up, allowing the bugs to climb straight over. I don't know if you recall that shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then we see thousands of the things, like the floor. You can't see the floor anymore. You can't see the desert floor. It's that covered in bugs. They hop off the wall into the enclosed outpost. And I'm sorry, based on the number of bugs we saw, they should have been over that wall in about 8 seconds. But then the scene carries on for another 10 minutes while they faff about with grenades and, their escape plan and all that stuff. And they're shooting the odd bug, but, they're not overwhelmed. The problem with that shot is it does make you, the audience member, go, holy fuck, how are they going to get out of that? This is surely they're dead, right? It does create that tension in you. The problem is, it's such a severe position to put them in. The movie then can't actually realistically get them out of it. So what then has to happen is that bajillion bugs don't climb over the wall until just after the transport has arrived and taken them away. It's just like, well, wait a minute. They were right there.
There's a lot of that in this movie, but then there's a lot of that in war movies. Do you know what I mean? How often, especially zombie shit, how often in zombie shit, do you just go, but sheer number alone, when your back is turned shooting one of them, one of those other fuckers is biting down on the back of your neck and killing you. There's just numbers alone mean you ain't surviving that, because you could be the best shot in the world. There's still time between being able to shoot, and there's still a point where once the number's greater than 5, someone can go behind you and circle you, and then presumably you're a little bit fucked.
Yeah, it made me think of World War Z. The movie, the Brad Pitt movie,
especially the visual of them climbing the wall. I mean, it made 100%. Me go, "Wow, World War Z pretty much stole that then, right?
You're right, yeah, a little bit. I mean, World War Z, to be fair, upped the scale quite a lot, I would say. But yeah, I was watching it thinking of that quite strongly. It definitely has vibes. And it's just worth noting, the World War Z movie, not in any way related to the World War Z book, and anyone who thinks it is, or wants to try and tell me that it is, I'm gonna hurt them. They're two different products. They just happen to be called World War Z. I refuse to accept one is related to the other.
It felt like a very specific and personal point there, Dan.
Anyway,
you brought a World War Z defense to a Starship Troopers.
I'm going to move us on, Chris. I don't want to talk about it. Is Xander a skis?
Are you saying the film is better than the book?
No, I'm saying the book is vastly better than the film, but the film is fine if it's not called World War Z.
Sorry, I meant to say the film is better than the book, and then the joke would have been clearer, but I fucked it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, the book is superior, for sure, but I think the film is perfectly acceptable in a world where you don't call it World War Z, because it is nothing to do with that book, what that film is. It shares one thing with the book, and that's the title.
Are you saying that the adaptation of the characters is inaccurate, Dan?
No, the characters from the book aren't in the movie.
No, I know. I think I've heard you rant about this before.
Don't call it World War Z. It's a different thing. You've bought the rights to a book to slap its name on a film.
But to bring it back, isn't that what happened here as well? From what you said earlier,
we'll talk about that. Well, yeah, but they shouldn't have called it Starship Troopers. In that case, we'll come to that. Let's talk about that too. I think this has some stuff, character names and elements from the book, but sort of reverse engineered. Again, we'll talk to it. We'll talk about it. Let's cover this. Is Xander a skeezy guy? Xander is the other pilot guy that Denise Richards' character kind of has some sort of interactions with that Rico is jealous of. Is he skeezy, or is he just being like, is he just right place, right time, and he's just getting away with it? Yeah.
What, the other pilot?
Yeah, the one that gets brain bugged at the end. I did. I must admit, I've clearly given my feelings away in my notes because I've written the brain bug thing is really gross, and seeing it kill someone is really upsetting. Except for it's Xander, so whatever.
I think again, there's a movie where you can view it from Xander's point, and it and he's not a dick. I think it's funny. What my bigger Xander point is, I thought it earlier when you were talking about how they felt that, Tarman's character was slightly damaged, so they took out a kiss. And I just thought, I mean, they lean in for a kiss. And I was almost frustrated by, I kind of wanted it specified whether they were together or not beyond that point. Is he a dick? As with all the characters in this movie, Dan, there's not a lot of time with him for me to make that judgment call. I think the second fight is completely unnecessary, and he's a bit of a bell end for seemingly fighting him because they weren't friends as kids. And I thought it was going to be a Tom Cruise, Val
Kilmer,
Val Kilmer situation, which obviously it wasn't. You know what I mean? He's a dick only because he doesn't get a redemption scene. He doesn't get the scene where he saves Rico's life and Rico goes, "You ain't so bad." And they could have done that. But in reality, he's just a bit of a smug twat, isn't he?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, I joke that that character's the worst or whatever because I think the movie frames him as that guy, but I think, you're right. All the movie has to do is frame Rico as that guy, and it's the same, Oh, your old boyfriend's followed you to the military? Not a nice guy, Yeah, it's you flip it and it works. The other thing I want to talk about, because I'd forgotten to mention this, I think one of the most powerful moments in the entire movie. So Rico loses his boss of. Was he little squad leader, whatever his little role is, and it gets given to Ace. Then they go to Clandethu, and Ace, who is supposed to be squad leader, who's probably one of my favorite characters in the movie, if not my favorite character in the movie, hesitates and says, "What are we doing?" when he looks over the hill and sees all the bugs coming towards them. Incredible. Top to bottom. One of the most powerful moments in the whole movie. Because it's a character that's had such bravado to look at what's happening. And he's the only one in the entire... In fact, thinking about it, it's the only time in the entire movie anyone takes a second to go, this is fucked. What's happening? Why are we doing this? The rest of the movie, no one questions it ever.
Yeah, for sure, it's very powerful.
And then, later in the movie, Rico's like, you want to command again? He's like, nope, I did that. I was bad at it. I was bad at being in command. I'm just going to be a grunt from now on. Fuck. That's a guy that's so indoctrinated, he sees his honest realization of the horror of what they're doing as a weakness. That's how fucked this world is.
Yeah, it's very
his reaction.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but it is.
Perfectly healthy reaction. What are we doing? Turns into, I'm a failure.
Yeah, that's wild. That's nuts.
So good. and subtle and easily missed. I think it's only in my last couple of viewings that I will have noticed that. I feel like I didn't put too much attention to that character as a younger person. Massive, absolutely massive. And very, very powerfully done. So yeah, big thumbs up to the writing on that one because I think that's really, really good. That invasion, by the way, is great.
I love as well, like, you think it's going to be an antagonist thing at the beginning. Yes. And he's like, well, I'm going to be your friend. That's all it is.
I love that character so much. That whole war, actually, that invasion scene is great. It's epic and brutal and visually interesting. Like, the scene from when you see the surface of the planet and all those blue plasma things are coming up and cutting through the ships. That's incredible visually. It's really good. Actually, let's talk about the visual effects in general. Considering this movie didn't have like a crazy budget, it had a pretty good budget, but not like, it wasn't Jurassic Park. It looks pretty good, right? Like, there aren't that many scenes where you go, yikes, at the special effects. They hold up pretty well, I think.
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, I think it's especially the stuff with the bug and the fighting and that blend of. I think what it is it uses, whilst obviously a lot of it is digital, when it comes to the gore, when it comes to the blood, when it comes to the goo, it's all very practical. It seems anyway.
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's a lot of really practical stuff around the gore, and I think you merge that with the CGI bugs, then it all sort of feels a lot more real.
Yeah, I think some of the in space stuff has maybe aged badly. / even for the time. I'm sure you could find a sci-fi movie made in 1997 with better looking space stuff than this movie. But again, that helps this sort of almost B-movie tone it's going for. So yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the everyone doing their bit where all the kids are kicking, squishing the cockroaches. It's so silly. So dumb.
Yeah. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I did write the note about this movie predicts Fox News before Fox News really becomes Fox News. You made the same point, so there's no point in me covering that. I don't have
is the shower scene a bit gratuitous while we're checking out quick points and questions?
That is a point of contention. Yes. A lot of people feel it is. I think there's an element of a small element of what we're saying is it's a future where a co-ed bathroom, a co-ed shower room is like fine. Like we're saying something about this particular future and how things have gone in terms of like gender politics and stuff. But at the same time,
you could view it both ways on that. and both points are like are interesting at the very least. Not justifying the scene, because I think I agree ultimately with where you're about to go. But you could either view it as this is a world where the world is way more unisex, and actually that's a good thing. And yes. That's also shown by the Dizzy character coming in after the man has failed to kick the general's ass, and having a better shot at it, doing better in that moment. And the notion of, well, it's unisex, so they're just all together. But you could also view it as these people are so engrossed and being made to be so focused on war that they're just not even they don't even really seeing each other naked as a sexual thing. It's just part of what they're doing for the war. There's so little other than kind of the reaction when he gets the video message, and obviously him and Dizzy sleeping together, which predates them in the war. There's no indication of them all, you know what I mean? There's such little sex in this movie because because the characters are so programmed. So yes. You could also view it as, well, they're showering together because it's not even a question of them of anything happening, because they just know it shouldn't.
Yeah, no one is sexualizing anyone. No one is it is the least sexual scene in any movie ever. There just happens to be a lot of nudity in it. And while I do think in terms of do we need that message in this movie? Probably not. I guess you probably could have got away with making these poor actors not do it. But equally, I do think that it adds a message to the movie about that, and I do think it says something about these characters and this world. So, gratuitous, I think you could argue it either way. I think somebody could tell me the movie doesn't need the scene, and I wouldn't disagree with them, or that the same scene could happen with them all just sort of in the room with their bunks, without being a shower scene. You'd get the same message in the sense of what they're saying in the scene. But I think what the scene says by having it be that way does add stuff to it, does add extra layers. Do you need those layers? Maybe not. So I think I would not disagree with someone who was arguing either way whether the nudity was gratuitous or not. But it's definitely a good point, and I think the film is often that scene does come up a lot in the discussions in this movie, and I think it's really interesting that a lot of people found that to be a talking point. And I think that's come up before as well with the director, who has kind of said, isn't it crazy that people are have more to say about my use of nudity in the one scene in this movie, and no one ever has anything to say about the gore and the violence of this movie. Says something about people are really fixated on whether that scene is gratuitous. No one's asking if the buckets of blood is gratuitous. It's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, I don't have a defense to the Rico being dead stuff, by the way. They bring him back. No one else can be brought back, seemingly. No one else gets brought back. They hand wave it away. They don't explain it enough. It's a fair point. It's a weird science fiction thing that's just never really addressed or explained.
It is so funny how this genre does change your character stuff, because your go-to with that, or take away from my point of view, is they don't explain it. My bigger issue with it is it's a great thing to explore, the impact that has on the character. What that means for the, is that going to make you conflict? Is that something we could have used with Ace? Ace could have gone, I watched my friend die. What the fuck's going on?
Yeah, right. Because the thing is, Rico can't care because he's indoctrinated now. War is just a part of his life. Rico can't react with horror to it. He has to react. So it is used in the movie to do a character thing, which is how flippantly they all react to it. Hey, dude, you're dead. Thumbs up. That's what they do with it. And again, it reinforces that idea. So it does have a character purpose. But you're right. It would be also good to have the one character that's shown hesitancy around any of this stuff go, shit, actually, my buddy died. And he's lucky to be alive. There's definitely room for it to have been used for that. But I think one of the reasons it gets away with it for me is I do think it is still doing character stuff. It's just doing something a bit different, than you'd expect. because again, the characters in this movie are not acknowledging the horrors of war. That's the point. So yeah. We haven't talked about Neil Patrick Harris's character at all. I like him. I like that he's a weird psychic guy. I think that's a really strange choice. I also like right at the beginning of the movie, before we learn he's psychic, he tells Rico that Dizzy fancies him, and at first you just think that's him being a bit perceptive and just sort of noticing that she's looking at him a lot or whatever. But 5 minutes later you go, oh yeah, he's saying that because he literally knows that, because he can see into her head. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I like that. It's weird. The whole psychic thing is, I don't know. Like, it's not. I don't think it's used that much. It almost feels like it's there to make sense at the end. Like when he reads how the bug's feeling. Like it's just not. And again, I think that's. And although I must admit, that scene after the funeral, where he immediately agrees to become the general. Part of me even then was like, is he controlling him? Is that? And they do that. I don't think it is, because they specifically do. They then do that at the end when he's like, right. Oh, did I know how to find her because you put it in my head? And he's like, which I quite liked, actually. I thought that was a pretty, because there's a part of me that's going, well, how does he know where she is and that she's alive? Because there's that bit where he goes, I just know she's alive, and I'm thinking, how? How do you know she's alive? And it comes immediately after. Call off the search. She's as good as dead. Like, I quite like the movie doing something that on the surface seems inexplicable and like a cheesy B movie thing that doesn't make any sense, but then actually gives it a reason and explains it. But I think the fact that you could believe it could be as simple as someone in the room happening to go, how does he know where she is? And how are we going to do we know they're definitely scared thing? Well, you know what? Let's put a psychic character in. Let's make Dougie Hauser psychic. Like, the fact that it's not so layered that it could have been as simple as that makes you go.
That's fair. Yeah, I quite liked it, but I definitely understand that perspective on it. It does feel a little bit retroactive, which I get. I made this note halfway through. The satire in this movie should not be considered subtle, because actually it's really the reason this movie gets considered to being subtle is because it's doing things other movies are doing for real, and that makes it seem normal. Like, this movie is objectively not subtle about its message and satire, and it's like what it's mocking from other military propaganda movies. But because those movies are so over the top, the fact that this movie is over the top doesn't feel that out of place, and it should. I did write that down. Sure. I thought that was true. I really like the way this movie sets up its action scenes. I really like that they do a really good job demonstrating how outmatched they are constantly. It constantly feels overwhelming, to a fault, as we've discussed in Nitpick Corner. But I do like that element of the movie. Rico becoming his mentor is a metaphor for the cycle of violence. Thank you, Pretentious Dan from yesterday, who wrote that note. To him, it's an honor to follow his mentor and say the same speech his mentor said to him when he got into the Roughnecks. I've only got 2 rules, whatever that speech is. But actually, what it's saying in the context of this film is that he's just a cog in the war machine that rotates fresh meat through a grinder. You teach. If you live... Oh, no, you get in, you get taught. If you live long enough, you become the teacher, and you just cycle through.
Yeah, and I think there's also... And you could point to so much of this movie and go, this is this. But, you think... An add-on point about Neil Patrick Harris's character, he was good at maths. He was smart, so he gets to be the one making the decisions about who dies, not the one fighting in the trenches, potentially dying. Neil Patrick Harris is phenomenally less at risk of dying in this movie, and shown to be that. Like, literally, even to the point, and again, it's that confliction. When I was first watching the movie, I'm going, well, where the fuck is Neil? Are we going to get some Deus Ex Neil Patrick Harris? Where is this character? And actually, again, the defense is, I think that's to service the point. The point is, we don't see him because he's just off somewhere, pulling the strings, making this decision, and literally being the silent, safe one. Like the people that like the wars, where it's the people in the big fancy buildings playing with the soldiers' lives. He's that figure, and it's very powerful.
Yeah, agreed. And it all comes back to that sentence. It's said a few times in this movie: "Till I get killed, or you find someone better."
Yeah.
And
it's like, but how do you feel that's his right to find someone better? Like, to make that judgment call on who's good enough to die. Terrific.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. Last little note I've got, Chris. Music. It's really good. Does sound a little bit like the music from RoboCop, but I don't care. The music from RoboCop is amazing.
There you go.
It's really good music. All right. Do you have any overriding thoughts? I mean, my overall thoughts. I still love this movie. It's definitely. I think it's like very intentionally flawed, but I wouldn't disagree with someone who told me that those flaws were a problem for them. I think in general, like, I understand why people don't always get this movie. I think I said to you before we started recording, and I've not said it on recording yet. I think in a weird way, this movie is an acquired taste, because you really have to get on board.
Yeah, for sure.
If you go along with what the movie's doing, you could potentially have a good time. But it's not wrong of you to not go along with the movie if you don't want to.
No, I think that's that's absolutely fine. I think. Because actually I think the same is true of RoboCop, and I was more. Like I said, I watched this yesterday, and you know what? I'd probably watch this again now, other than watching RoboCop. RoboCop's one of those movies where I recognise its strengths, but I just don't particularly have any. I'm not necessarily going, "Oh, I'll watch that again. I'll watch the sequels, etc." Unless the one thing I would be desperate to see with RoboCop, though, is obviously. Part human, part robot, all cop. The dramatization of the making of that movie, which I would love to see. I
mean, let's be honest though, Chris. I could easily my next choice. I could just choose RoboCop again. We've never discussed the rules. But I suppose this is the nuclear situation, though, because you have a threat that you could equally pose to me. I could force you to watch RoboCop again. You could easily force me to watch one of the Starship Troopers sequels.
Yeah, and also, as funny as I think the thing is, like, if I chose Starship Troopers 2, that's a gag which then does lead to one way or the other. An interesting or an entertaining, or well, maybe not entertaining, but the key word, new podcast. The actual reality of us doing a movie we've already reviewed is literally, I was listening to this point, and I listened back to this point, and I disagreed with it, or I listened back to this point, and I still feel that way, or way worse than that. To avoid repeating ourselves. Didn't listen to that other podcast, and here's us naturally repeating ourselves.
Yeah,
the reality of doing that. I don't think
I'll have to address my feelings on the Starship Troopers sequels, though, because there is a part of me that thinks that could be interesting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But especially compared to the idea of doing RoboCop again to make me watch it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. There's definitely more merit to doing a Starship Troopers 2 podcast. I'm like. Yeah, I've got to atone for my feelings on that, and whether for science, I want to put myself through it when I've avoided it for so long. But if I was ever going to do it, at least do it for the value of, an interesting discussion, because it would be an interesting discussion.
For sure.
So maybe I'll think about it. Let me mull on that one, and maybe we'll come back to them. Because I think there's I could be wrong, but I think there's 6 sequels, which is crazy when you think about it.
To answer your question before we triv it up, I'm less conflicted than I was at the beginning of the podcast, because again, it's that sitting with it, thinking about it, and obviously, we've spent over 2 hours thinking about it and talking about it. And I think, that argument, and I acknowledge this going in, that argument of, well, it's all in service of the point. I think it's a fucking magic trick. I almost think it's unfair that that you can do that, but I can't deny that I feel that way about every single point, and I value the genius of some of those points, the genius of what Neil Patrick Harris's character represents, the genius of the choice to make Dizzy's character arc the same, but she gets the tragic end. The genius of how disposable those battle scenes are, how deliberate all of that feels. I think is.
But I think particularly strongly with Ace. Like that was one of my bigger takeaways from this particular viewing, was the Ace one. Being the only fucking character to actually realize what they're doing. It's pretty incredible as it goes.
All of that outweighs, the other stuff. But I will say it again: not doing any, just being like, he's alive is nuts, and I think almost more so. I mean, if you just respond to this quickly, I'm not wrong, am I? They absolutely make it look like Denise Richards is dead and never explain how she survived the fucking fire coming at her and got away with just a cut in the next scene. Unless she had a bath, maybe. She took one of those magic baths and, I don't know.
No, she didn't. They come back and they're like dabbing her head. No, that one. That one. There's no defense for. That's just there's no commentary on that one. There's no explanation for it. That is just them teasing a death that they weren't willing to commit to. I you see, that's the difference though. You see, the Rico one, I go, you're right. It's quick. It's never explained, but at least I get this point out of it. They find that he died amusing, not horrifying. The Denise Richards sort of common death fake out is just a death fake out. That's bad movie making. That's bad storytelling. Yeah. There's no intention to that, because I can't even potentially draw what that was trying to say. That's an actual moment in the movie that for me and I agree with you, just doesn't really work.
Can you draw one personally to? Can you make a defense or draw a theme to the fact that the villain is, or the character we're told is the villain to these characters, is caught by someone else on screen? Or do you think that's also bad movie making, or can you draw a defense?
A little bit bad movie making, but it's basically that's. So I think the villain being caught off screen by a different character isn't great, but it does allow them to do something else. It's not directly related to that, but I think the Clancy Brown character, who's the character that comes back and does that, that's the reveal that he is demoted himself. He has taken multiple demotions to be able to be on the front line himself. Because we set up earlier in the movie, he wants to go back to the front line and fight, and they're like, no, you're experienced, we need you as a teacher. And then the next time we see him is saving, helping save the world by being on the front line himself. So it does give us that moment, but you could have slipped that moment in anywhere else. If I'm being honest, you could have had him just be part of that final mission, kicking ass, and had the same roughly quality. I don't really see why Rico couldn't have been part of the capture. If you want me to believe that by the end of the movie, Rico is top dog military guy, in that last vignette that they do, Rico seems to be pretty high up now, him and the Roughnecks. It'll make a lot more sense if they'd successfully completed the mission and it was Rico that had caught the bug.
Yeah, especially, most of his amazing military maneuvers are based on, his experience on a sports team.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which, by the way, we haven't talked about it. There's a sport in this movie that's been invented that's there's a lot of it's like gymnastics and football strapped into one, and then he uses several of those moves in fights throughout the movie, and they always look ridiculous, and I kind of love it. But going back to that ending, I think practically speaking as well, right? I could hear somebody arguing, well, wait a minute though, we want Rico to go save Carmen because that's like a satisfying character thing. In the end, there's a moment of him choosing to save a friend over the war effort, which is actually, out of character for him. But then we have that twist of actually he was doing it for the war effort because tactically he knew she was still alive and sent him after her, and that was part of that is what drove the bug out to be caught by Clancy Brown. But couldn't that all have been a lot cleaner if the brain bug was still with her character Carmen when Rico shows up and he saves the girl and captures the bug in one final action scene? And then you go, well, actually, the reason Neil Patrick Harris sent him there was not because he gave a shit about Carmen's life, but actually because he knew Rico could catch the brain bug if he went. That's cleaner.
Yeah.
So sure. I think those two things are like, there's a reason that when you brought up those 2 points, we ended up talking about other stuff, because I agree with those points. It's that same thing we do here on this podcast, where sometimes it's like, I agree with everything the person just said, let's move on. I don't want to just repeat what you said, but yeah, the Carmen surviving the clear, obvious ship explosion, madness, with just a tiny cut on her eyebrow or whatever, and Clancy Brown's character randomly just saving the day with the brain bug. Neither of those are great, and I don't really have a defense for them, so I pretty much agree with you on both of those. So yeah.
So in that case, Dan,
very quickly, let's triv it up! I'm going to give you some trivia. And I'm actually going to start with something I've just looked up separate to our normal trivia, because I was curious, actually, how many sequels are there? So there's a trilogy of live-action movies. The Starship Troopers, 1997. Starship Troopers 2, Hero of the Federation, 2004 sequel. And then Starship Troopers 3, Marauder, which was a 2008 live-action film. Since then, there has been 2 other sequel films, but those were animated. So there was a 2012 animated film called Invasion, and Starship Troopers Traitor of Mars, which is a 2017 animated film. There was also a TV series called Roughnecks, Starship Troopers Chronicles, which was a computer-animated TV show set in the same universe as the book rather than the show.
I just want to correct as well, because I just looked it up myself as we were talking at the end there. Only Rico comes back, and he's not in the second film.
Really?
According to the cast page on the Wikipedia, yeah. Whether there's cameos, I don't know.
Still written by Edward Neumeier, though, I've just noticed. Same writer. Oh, and that same writer wrote and directed the third one.
Let me double check again.
Casper Van Dien is back in the...
in the third one, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I see, yeah.
But he's not in the second one, and he appears, at least on that cast grid on Wikipedia, he appears to be the only one.
Fascinating. I don't know. Interesting. Anyway, I want to correct something, actually. It says here...
Well, Carl Jenkins is in the animated films, but not played by Neil Patrick Harris. And same with Denise Richards' character. The character is in there.
Yes, the only one I think that returns to the animated films is that's when they brought Dina Meyer back to voice Dizzy for like a video scene or something. So she's in the animated ones, I think. But I wanted to quickly say, earlier I said, Starship Troopers Chronicles, a computer-animated TV show set in the same universe as the book. That doesn't appear to be correct. I think it's in the same universe as the movies, based on the fact it's called Paul Verhoeven Roughnecks, Starship Trooper Chronicles. So someone has done a boo-boo on the wiki. So anyway, trivia time. Let's triv it up. Give you some trivia, all that jazz.
Let's triv it up!
We already did it up. We'll give you some trivia. Right. So, Edward Neumeier, the writer of this movie, was writing an original script called Bug Hunt at Outpost 9, when similarities between this and the Robert A. Heinlein novel were pointed out. So, rather than adjusting his novel to be different, they simply optioned the novel and licensed the name so they could just keep doing it. So because the movie originated from an unrelated script with names and superficial details from the book being then added retroactively, there are many, many differences between the book and the film. So I just want to clarify that I'm not going to go into those differences because character names have been maintained. and a couple of plot elements, I guess, just through by nature, because it was originally that they were similar to start with. But there's almost nothing else that's the same as the book. So
it's nowhere near as faithful as World War Z, then, is what you're saying.
I stand by my criticism of World War Z, because I think World War Z, and I said this at the time, and I said it just a few minutes ago, is a fine film. It just should not be called World War Z. It's a passable film. It's not an adaptation of World War Z. A little bit true here with Starship Troopers. And that's extra true, Chris, when you realise that director Paul Verhoeven admits to have never finishing the novel.
Fair play.
He read through the first few chapters and became both bored and depressed, calling it a right-wing book. That's what he told Empire Magazine. He told screenwriter Edward Neumeier to just tell him the rest of the book. Verhoeven and Neumeier then decided that while both the novel and its author strongly supported a regime led by a military elite, they would turn the concept around and satirize it, making the film a hyperbole. We'll go with hyperbole. That's the way I should have said it. Just, reading. Of contemporary American politics and culture. Now, die-hard fans of the book feel that the filmmakers have misunderstood the original book, and that actually the guy that wrote that book was a libertarian who opposed conscription and militarism. He was just interested in sort of exploring what would happen in a society led by a military rather than a government. But he wasn't specifically advocating it. He was just sort of speculating, could that system exist? I don't know. I've not read the book, but I think, Paul Verhoeven came out of it feeling that the book was pretty fascist. He said that a few times. He grew up in Nazi Germany. I reckon he's probably got a good eye for that sort of thing. I'm going to trust the director in this case and suggest that maybe the book isn't, whether the intention of the author or not, I think probably not great. So, yeah. Little alternate potential director at one point before Verhoeven was on board. They nearly brought in James Cameron. I don't think I would have been interested in seeing that movie.
Nope.
I think James Cameron has proven that his approach to lampooning the military-industrial complex is pretty on the nose and not very interesting. He
does have a strength, though, in making movies appear to work, even though the character work is non-existent.
Yes. Yeah. It's true. His movies make money. Starship Troopers would have been much more successful had James Cameron directed it, I'm sure. But it certainly would have been a worse film, I think. What I like about Verhoeven is he just does not give a shit. He makes these singularly visioned movies and does not have any real compunction about making them appeal to wide audiences. He's like, it's going to be a challenging movie. You can either get on board with it or you can't. That's also fine. I think there's something quite good about a director quite so singularly minded. So in the DVD commentary, he states his intentions a little bit more clearly. So he says the film's message is that war makes fascists of us all, to the point where he very deliberately evoked Nazi Germany's fashion, iconography, and propaganda because he saw it as a natural evolution of the post-World War II United States. I've heard this film nicknamed All Quiet on the Final Frontier. I see. That's just something he said that they've put in here. Screenwriter Edward Neumeier broadly concurs, though, and very much sees the film as a satire on human history rather than solely the US, though. So they both look at it from different perspectives. Verhoeven kind of sees it as a satire of specifically US culture. I feel like Neumeier feels it's more of a commentary on just human history in general and how across the world we keep slipping into these. But on the point of the uniforms, nearly every military uniform has German military and SS references. The flag of the Federation itself actually has a symbol that very closely resembles the Imperial Eagle from World War II Germany. Not subtle.
No, I on that particular debate, I'd fall on the side personally of it's the whole world history, not just specifically the US.
Yes. And I think that's interesting because I think that actually leads into what I was talking about earlier. The movie is working on two levels. There's an element of the movie that's making fun of a worldwide leaning to militarization and fascism and all that stuff that we've fought as a society across history, but also because the story is being told through the medium of film, Verhoeven is also doing a separate meta-commentary on American war films. So it makes sense to me that Verhoeven's perspective is US focused, because the US really does make those movies a lot more than I think. Well, who knows, actually. That, I can't say I've seen all the movies that come out of all the various countries that exist. But I think there's something very specific about the tone of this movie and what it's sort of partially parodying is these sort of like pro-war movies that come out of the States. But that's really in the direction and the style and the way he's doing that. That's not really from the script. So it makes sense to me that the script is focused on the more worldwide satire of actual fascist ideals, and the movie is more interested in parodying or satirizing pro-military movies. So what a perfect sort of melding of director and writer this ended up being.
Yeah, for sure, for absolute sure.
Yeah, I think this was interesting. So Verhoeven and Screenwriter had. We already talked about this actually, so I'll cover this. But yeah, there's not much more detail. Verhoeven and Neumeier had unprecedented freedom in making this movie because management at Sony was changing so often, and by the time any actual studio executives took time to look at the footage, Verhoeven had basically compiled a rough cut of the movie, and it was almost done. So, sorry, Sony.
Great. That's another. That's like in the same vein as the piece of trivia before it. Like that worked out. They lucked out there. There's a lot of that with this.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, in terms of the quality of the movie, for sure. But in terms of the movie's box office performance, maybe less so. But
fair.
Several actors were considered for the role of Johnny Rico, including James Marsden, Keanu Reeves, Mark Wahlberg, Josh Brolin, and Jason Priestley. I don't think I'm interested in seeing any. Maybe Marsden.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe Marsden of all of them, but nah.
Yeah, mostly I'm happy with who we got. Nev Campbell and Rebecca Gayheart were considered for the part of Carmen, were both too busy doing Scream 2. I find that really hilarious that they weren't just both busy. They were both busy making the same fucking movie. That's hilarious. I enjoy that. So, this piece of trivia should be just Paul Verhoeven's a lunatic. Oh, we should clarify, actually. We talked a lot about the struggles and the stresses and the difficulties on the set of RoboCop. Everyone was miserable. No one was happy. It was a nightmare shoot. The movie is great, in my opinion, but a lot of people suffered to make that movie happen. I should clarify here, not so much of a problem on this movie. There were definitely disagreements on set, and, several actors have done interviews, which I've not covered in the trivia, where they talked about Verhoeven getting, frustrated and angry at times when things weren't going his way or whatever, but like nothing anywhere near the misery on the set of RoboCop. I wanted to clarify that because we that was such a point when we did the trivia for RoboCop. This movie did not anywhere near have a struggle of a production. That's step one. I guess no one was really paying too much attention to them, it sounds like. Anyway, they were just doing their thing. But this blows my mind. It just makes me think all Verhoeven sets are just madness. So director Paul Verhoeven and stars Dina Meyer and Casper Van Dien have confirmed separately that Verhoeven and cinematographer Jost Vacano shot the co-ed shower scene while nude themselves.
Sorry? What?
On the day of the shoot, Verhoeven had asked the cast to do a little sort of fashion show without fashion so they would be comfortable being naked, because the point of the scene is obviously that it's not a big deal that they're all naked. They're not sexualizing themselves. That's literally the purpose of the scene. So he wanted the cast to be very comfortable once they shot it. When the cast showed some reluctance to disrobe, Verhoeven asked them what the big deal was, to which Dina Meyer, who plays Dizzy, said, "Paul, if it's no big deal, why don't you do it?" Very unexpectedly, he immediately undressed, as did the cinematographer Jost Volcano. And while initially shocked, they all had a laugh, and then the scene was filmed without any problems. There's something right, that, like this movie, I've never felt so conflicted about a piece of trivia.
Yeah, because on the you know what it is? I think that's one of those things where the fact that they've all said it was fine, the fact that they kind of appreciated it, the fact that it worked, the fact that it did actually make everyone feel more comfortable is great. But at the same time, fundamentally, he's whipping his dick out. Which is never good.
I just love the idea of anyone repeating this story to a person from Sony's HR.
Yeah.
Like, imagine that. Wait, sorry, so the director took his clothes off while he filmed you?
It's nuts, isn't it?
It's pretty crazy. I feel a little bit, I feel conflicted about that. Because if it worked and it made everyone way more comfortable and we, and no one minded and absolutely fine and there was no harm in it, like great. But like there's just a part of me that thinks just something sounds off about that whole thing.
Well, it's that classic. It's that common thing of like just because everyone was comfortable doesn't mean it wasn't wrong.
Right.
But
agreed. Yeah,
but that's that's now that we're we know more about these things and to some degree the film industry has changed. Now it would be wrong for any film to have any kind of sex scene and not have an intimacy coordinator. But that, unfortunately, tragically, wasn't a thing in 1997.
Correct. Yeah. While we're on the subject of nudity, actually, Denise Richards there was a script. So the original script didn't have a nude scene, but an updated draft did. That he'd wanted to include a love scene at some point in the movie. The script's always evolving, and she basically said no. It was not only was it her first big budget film, but she just didn't think the nude scene was related to her character or really had any point. So she just turned it down. Now, I've never done this before, Chris, but I'm going to call out the person who wrote this piece of trivia as a misogynist and a piece of shit.
Right,
because the way they've written it, because the way they've written it, Chris, is Denise Richards refused to do a topless scene that wasn't in the original script. Yeah, fine. During filming, director Paul Verhoeven told her that he'd written a new scene for her, including a love scene, which would require nudity. Despite the fact this is only her first big budget film, she still said no, even though it could have hurt her career, because she didn't think her being nude related to the character or the movie. Thumbs up, writer of trivia. Stop there, because what they then add, but she did then go topless for a sex scene a year later in Wild Things, and she posed fully nude for Playboy in 2004 when her career faltered. Right.
Jesus!
Right. Two things. Just because someone chooses not to do it in a certain circumstance, when they didn't feel it's right, they didn't feel comfortable with it, they didn't think it was needed in the movie, they thought it was gratuitous, doesn't mean that at a later point in their career they might feel more comfortable to do it, that they might feel like it's more relevant to the plot and more needed for the context of the movie. I think we should respect that choice. I don't think sticking your little dig at the end at the fact that she did it later on has any bearing on the fact she chose not to there, and then particularly adding the when her career faltered bit, implying that the only reason she did it was for because her career was struggling. A fuck you to the writer of that piece of trivia.
A big fuck you. That's
fuck you all the way. I'm not saying anything in that is technically wrong in the sense of she probably did then do a topless scene in Wild Things. I don't seen that movie, but I'm not suggesting the trivia is necessarily inaccurate. I'm suggesting the person who wrote it is a prick.
Yeah, for sure.
And a misogynist. Sure. Cool. Skeezy little piece of shit. Moving on. I've never had to do that before. I've never thought too much about the people who write these trivia, but that person, arsehole. Most of the arachnids appearing on film are CGI, but a few life-sized robotic models were built However, during many of the battle scenes, the way they ended up working out, a lot of the actors ended up just looking up at director Paul Verhoeven himself, who would stand in front of them, jump up and down, and scream at them while chasing them with a broom to elicit reactions and attempting to, generate fear of a thing. Clancy Brown has affectionately described the director as a nutbag.
I think that's fair from all we're hearing.
Yeah, apparently he said he was jumping up and down with a bullhorn, yelling, "I'm a big fucking bug, I'll kill you." Clancy Brown did add that this was not as weird as it seems. He says, "I love the guy. He was a lot of fun." So Clancy Brown clearly not offended by that choice. But it is becoming clear across the trivia for these two movies that we've done of Paul Verhoeven's that he's a lunatic.
Well, I just think, Paul, the director's role is not to just to do if there's a question over something, not to just jump in and do it yourself. It wouldn't surprise me if you were like, and you want the next piece of trivia, Chris? Oh yeah, I'd love the next piece of trivia, Chris. Okay, cool. One day the catering department produced sandwiches that the cast weren't particularly too fond of. So Paul went ahead, ordered a load of ingredients, and spent the rest of the afternoon making sandwiches himself. Chill out, buddy. Don't worry about it. Oh, we don't want to get naked. I'll get naked.
He is extremely hands-on, isn't he? It seems that way anyway.
Yeah. The poster for Starship Troopers, the graphic designer, had a bit of a cold that day, so the poster was created by Paul. He also, whilst sat there, someone else in the room said, "God, I can't believe what happened with that nude scene, Paul." And Paul said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, just, it seems a bit uncomfortable." And he said, I'll prove it's not uncomfortable. And he designed that poster with his dick out.
He does, he's an interesting character. Actually, to the point where, and this is the next piece of trivia, which is good, the audio commentary for the movie was one of the very first to be accompanied by a disclaimer stating that the opinions in the commentary belong to the speaker and don't reflect the opinions of the studio. Now, that disclaimer has since become standard practice as a protective measure, but I think it's very telling that they put that at the front of the one with Paul.
Yeah, for sure.
On set, Neil Patrick Harris's character was often referred to as Doogie Himmler whenever he wore the military intelligence uniform, as it bore a striking resemblance to the SS uniform. Obviously, this is a joke because Harris played Doogie Howser on TV, and it's obviously a reference to the SS leader Heinrich Himmler. Forevermore, Doogie Himmler will live in my brain.
Has Neil Patrick Harris ever played just a guy, just a normal character? No. But do you know what I mean, though? He's just even in films like this and maybe Gone Girl, where at first he appears normal, you then discover he's crazy. I feel like they're either always Olaf or they turn into Olaf, and Barney's the same for anyone going, well, what about Barney? Barney's this suit-wearing, uniform, appalling to women character. Neil Patrick Harris has never just played like a guy, just a dude. Just he's just, he's cool. He's a dude.
It's a Sin.
Yeah.
I was just about to say he played a reasonably normal character in It's a Sin.
Oh God, one of the most. God, the tragedy.
Obviously, quite a fun, energetic character with a lot of personality, but not like a complete weirdo like some of these other characters he's played.
I genuinely, even still now, I'll be just walking through life, just getting on with my day, just not in any way even thinking about TV, and still have moments where I'll just to myself, to no one, just go, "Fucking hell, It's a Sin was great, wasn't it?"
Yeah.
What a show.
Absolutely so good. So during the training scene, the two characters that are involved in the shooting, so Dejana and Breckenridge is the one who's killed accidentally. Those two actors met on this movie, and they're together now and have a child.
That's great.
But it's just so funny to me. It's literally the character that pulls the trigger and the character that dies, and those two actors ended up together. I just enjoy that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, imagine that. Mummy, Daddy, how did you meet? Let's show them the scene.
I think in that instance, if they're that young, you'd probably just say it on a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing a joke, but yes, agreed.
No.
I was doing a funny. Or I was trying to do a funny. Is more accurate description. Yeah, I love this. Despite the fact they're playing high school graduates at the beginning, Casper Van Dien, Dina Meyer, and Patrick Muldoon were all about 29 when they made the film. Look, it's a movie that spans multiple years. They have to grow into adults. If you'd hired actual teenagers, it would have been even more ridiculous later on.
Yes, I think that's fair.
All right, so special segment for our trivia this week, Chris, called "Tell Me Who Didn't Get Hurt on This Movie." Every major member of the cast got hurt in some way in this movie, in varying ways. Let's talk about it. So Casper Van Dien really did punch Patrick Muldoon by accident in the face when giving him a bloody lip during a fight scene, during the fight scene in the space station. Muldoon stated in an interview that Casper, quote unquote, hits hard. Now I've looked into it. Those two are actually quite good. Those two are quite good friends in real life. So he's obviously that's not a he hits hard like a bitter man, frustrated that he got hit in the movie or anything like that. That's clearly a friendly little jibe at the fact that he accidentally hit him. So everyone's cool with it. I just want to clarify. No animosity there. During the scene where Michael Ironside's character falls into the hole and gets his leg bitten off, Dina Meyer hit her head, was knocked unconscious, and suffered a concussion. Cool. So we've got Xander and we've got Dizzy. They're all hurt now. Let's see who else gets hurt. During filming, Jake Busey, who played Ace, suffered heat stroke after working all day in 120-degree desert sun. This stopped production for nearly a week. When he recovered, large holes were cut into his uniform, and it sounds like many other cast member suits received modifications to prevent further cases. On average, there were about 25 people per day being treated for heat stroke during the filming of the desert scenes. That's rough.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
So now we've got Ace. We've added Ace. We've got Xander. We've got Dizzy. Let's see who else got hurt on this movie. Oh yeah, Casper Van Dien broke a rib when he came off the tanker bug. He also, when he landed, his gun hit him in the face and chipped 2 of his teeth.
Add him to the list.
Last one. Dina Meyer accidentally shot one of the guns near Jake Busey. Ace can't get a break. This is his second one. She actually, unfortunately, blew his eardrums out. Now, luckily, he was wearing ear protection because they were using blanks, which are loud. So he didn't receive the full brunt and didn't receive any permanent damage. I imagine the emphasis on the word permanent in that text suggests he did receive a certain amount of temporary damage and loss of hearing, which is brutal.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's the end of my new segment. Who the hell didn't get hurt on this movie? Because pretty much every fucking did.
Great segment, Dan.
Good. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Some stats. You would like some stats? Got some numbers?
Give me the numbers.
More ammunition was used in this movie than any other movie on record up to this point. I don't know about after. This record doesn't have that detail, but according to a veteran weapons coordinator, Robert the Rock Gallotti, sorry mate, there's only one person that gets the Rock as a nickname, but all right. The crew apparently expended over 300,000 blanks during filming, which was an absolute record, at least at the time. The film had about 1,400 extras, which is bonkers. That's so many extras. 17 gallons of fake blood, also insane. And 256 characters die on screen in the movie, which is approximately 96 more than the number of glasses Daniel Radcliffe went through during the course of the Harry Potter movies. I couldn't keep a straight face. I'm so sorry.
You also, I don't believe, did it last week.
Yeah, I probably forgot it. Look, I'm just doing it when I feel like it now. I'll just do it when I feel like it.
Yeah, that was good. And that was a very good way of doing it. That was very nicely done, I have to say.
There you go. So, the battle gear, the suits that were made for this movie, were reused a bunch, and have been seen in many things. Most notably, or most noticeably, you see people. Every now and then you'll see a TikTok video where it's like, "Did you know that the suits from Starship Troopers were also used in?" And it's always Power Rangers: The Lost Galaxy and Firefly. So very famously in Firefly, the suits worn by the I forgot what the name of the evil government in Firefly is called, but their troops on the train in the Train Job episode are all wearing literally Starship Trooper uniforms because they already existed and were therefore cheap as free to the studio because they just had them. But those suits, they made so many of them that they've just been reused bunch of times.
That's
across.
Cool that they were used in Power Rangers. That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that series. Lost Galaxy? Which one was that?
No, it was the first. Although I think maybe Bulk and Skull were in some way connected, but it was the first. I believe it was the first series of them completely not necessarily. Even though there was maybe one subtle thing, it wasn't the ongoing story. It was the first of the we're gonna do disconnected stuff every year. Whilst Zeo, Turbo, and In Space were separate, new Zords, new whatever each year. They were telling a continuous story, whereas sort of Lost Galaxy is really stepping away from that and sort of not that ongoing narrative. That's that's probably the beginning of it truly becoming a different thing each year.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I remember. I vaguely remember that era, because that's kind of when I drifted away, but there you go. So, in the timeout sequence during the jump ball game, when they're Rico's all distracted because his girlfriend seems interested in another guy. The scene where they're talking strategy and Rico's not really paying attention and Dizzy smacks him around the head. Apparently, that wasn't in the script. She actually smacked him, and his response was completely genuine. So that's quite fun. He's wearing a helmet. She's not hurting him, but it's quite fun that is a genuine reaction. It makes sense because when you watch it, it is a really good reaction. So yeah. For the scene where Dizzy gets killed by the bug, Dina Meyer argued with director Verhoeven on her character screaming after being stabbed because she was sort of saying when the claw comes out of her chest, there should be no air in her lungs for her to emit a scream. She wanted it to be authentic. Verhoeven's response was to simply tell her to just scream. This guy, I don't know. I've got such mixed feelings on Verhoeven. It's so dismissive.
I'm looking up the other films he made, see if there's anything else we can get in.
Incredible. Several scenes were filmed following Carmen coming to grips with the supposed death of Johnny Rico, and then starting a relationship with Xander. However, test audiences hated her character for hooking up with another man so soon after the death of her former lover and were very vocal about it. The scenes were subsequently deleted, although a relationship between Carmen and Xander is still implied throughout the rest of the movie. I think that's better.
It's better, but come on. The only reason they don't kiss in the movie is because a fucking asteroid appears.
Right. Yeah, correct. Yeah. It's not they've not exactly completely done away with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, it's funny how that one change clearly made test audiences change their mind about it, and it's just funny how people can ignore what they don't want to see. If they didn't like the idea that she would do that, if they take out the overt kiss, then you can just assume that they weren't actually together.
Yeah.
Kind of placating everyone. To avoid getting an NC-17 rating, only 4 seconds had to be trimmed from a decapitation during the last battle at the Whiskey Outpost base. However, those 4 seconds were reinserted absolutely inexplicably in a version that was aired on the FX network at some point. Baffled. No idea why. I
wonder, because this strikes me as a film that is probably shown on television before Watershed, and I was like intrigued to see like what they do about the boobs, the gore, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I have no idea. I assume you cut around it, you blur it. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe it just isn't shown before Watershed because it is a very gory movie.
Yeah, true.
In the UK, it is very hilariously available on Disney Plus. The sequels are not, because the sequels were made entirely from, I think, Sony's end. But this was the first one was a co-production, or at least through distribution. Disney distributed the movie through Touchstone Pictures and therefore had rights to it, which is why it's on Disney Plus in the UK. But it is kind of hilarious that this movie is on Disney Plus.
Yeah, but don't forget we can. I'd be intrigued to see if you can access it if you've not got your settings to show the adult content. I wonder.
Yeah, no, almost certainly you can't, right? Because yeah, I'd be shocked. Apparently in the UK, I don't think this is in my triv, but apparently in the UK, the movie got a 15 rating when it came in cinemas, but they actually regretted that choice and felt it really deserved an 18. So when it came out on home video, they gave it an 18. They bumped it up.
Fair enough.
So apparently the cow that was killed by the arachnid in the media commercial was a completely digital thing. So the censoring, when removed, as you can see in a bonus feature on the DVD, shows that what actually occurs behind the censoring bar is just a big spray that's spraying blood everywhere. It's just a hose that's just putting blood everywhere. The cow obviously was a completely CGI creation. That's fun.
Yeah.
Besides Rico, Ace is the only one of Rico's squad mates from boot camp to actually survive the movie. We already talked about that, but it's in my triv. Maybe that's where I knew that for sure. The movie did not fare well in the States. Budget was about 105 million. The box office, about 121 million worldwide, with a 54 million domestic. It probably broke even, or close to it, with when you add marketing. It's not great. But I do think it's interesting that it's had multiple sequels. I do think that says something about how people have come to love the movie over time. And actually, that is what the last couple of bits of trivia relate to. Critical reaction to the film at the time was towards the negative. The Washington Post savaged the film for its perceived glorification of Nazi symbolism and totalitarian regimes. Analysts noted that after a strong 22 million opening weekend, the poor critical reception was actually very likely for the 50% drop in revenue during the film's first week in cinemas. So basically, opening weekend, it looked like it was going to do quite well financially, the movie. But then all the reviews came out, and the next weekend it had a big drop, 50%. First signs of critical reappraisal came in 2001, when parallels were noted between the war on terror in Afghanistan and the film's sort of patrolling Marines on the bug planet. In 2012, Slant magazine ranked the film 20th on its list of 100 best films of the 90s. In 2017, The Guardian claimed that this is no longer science fiction, it has become reality. In the 2020, David Roth of The New Yorker has praised the film as being visionary and has said it eerily predicted the past decade of decadence, decay, and rising institutional violence and unrestricted bad taste. Agreed. Yeah, so to the director's dismay, obviously, when it initially came out, the majority of American critics failed to see the film's precisely calibrated irony, accusing the director of being guilty of right-wing tub-thumping. He says, "We were accused by the Washington Post of being neo-Nazis." He says, obviously still irked. "It was tremendously disappointing. They couldn't see that all I have done is ironically create a fascist utopia. The English got it, though. I remember going out of Heathrow and seeing the posters, which was great. They were just stupid lines about war from the movie. I thought, finally, someone knows how to promote this. In America, they promoted it as another Bang Bang movie." That could be part of it too. We hadn't really considered that possibility, but yeah, marketing matters too, right? If you promote it as a action movie, people go in with that expectation, they might not see the satire.
Especially as you could easily promote this as essentially Star Wars, and actually the beginning would throw you off, not because of even necessarily all the propaganda stuff, but I think the beginning could throw you off because it feels like Star Wars, but a teen movie. And again, I think very deliberate. It's a teen movie because then the true horror of who these people become is intensified by it feeling like a teen movie at the beginning. But I think if you were going in expecting Star Wars at the beginning, you'd be like, "Am I getting American Pie? Like, what's happening here?"
Yes.
So
yeah, agreed. Last little thing, director Paul Verhoeven's favourite movie of his own. So when asked what his favourite movie he's done is, and he's done quite a lot, he's got quite a prolific film career, he said it's this one. And then I added this because, again, Chris, just questioning the writer of the trivia, someone thought it was appropriate to add to the trivia on IMDb that this is Macaulay Culkin's favourite movie.
I think that's fine. I think that's great trivia. I'm so on board with that.
I guess so. Yeah, fine, sure. Now we're running out of time because I've only got to this office for so long today. Chris, I don't have Cars Exist. I'm very sorry about that. So we're sort of forced to straight away. Any final thoughts on this movie, and then find out where we're going. We just got to do it because it feels weird. It feels weird to not have Cars Exist, but there are no cars in this movie. I could have spaceships exist, but then none of these spaceships are spaceships. Like they're not like they're spaceships. They're invented. They're not, none of them are like a specific design or spaceship from anything else. Apparently, there's a toy Millennium Falcon in the background of one of the scenes. Sure.
Oh, that's cool. It's a good reference. People exist. There are people in this movie. There you go. We've named some.
There you go. There you go. Bugs exist. There's cockroaches in this movie. There you go.
Yeah. There you go.
Cool. So let's wrap it up. Final thoughts. This is a long one.
Yeah, I think just what I said before we started the triv, really. I think we kind of did that. Like, I less conflicted than I was, because I think the point that it's making is so strong and so well highlighted, and there's so many things that are so incredibly deliberate. It outweighs the madness of the fake out death and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's not as eloquent as what I said, because I kind of see earlier. I think those are my big overriding thoughts.
Well, in that case, then, where are we going?
What about you? Or do you have the same answer? See earlier.
Well, I honestly still maintain this is basically a masterpiece. I think it's what happens when a studio stops fiddling with a director with such a clear vision. I hate calling someone a visionary, but like in many ways Verhoeven is. Like, for all of his faults seemingly as a person, he's clearly a lunatic. He's worked on many a stressful set, and he's done some weird shit. And I'm sure if it came out tomorrow that he was some sort of like monster, I'd be like, yeah, maybe, I guess. Like, it doesn't, do you know what I mean? Like, he's probably a very nice guy, but like, there's all, neither answer would surprise me with him. But in terms of his creativity and his output as a creative, like, he's got such a clear sense of identity in his movies when he's allowed to. When the studio leaves him alone, whether by accident or on purpose, he creates really, really good stuff. He really does understand what it is he's doing, and I think this is basically a masterpiece. It's a really, really top tier film, and I think it is shame that it's been misunderstood by so many for so long. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to watch it. Although if you've listened this far, then you've had the entire movie spoiled. So shame on you. But yeah, I big recommend. I think everyone should watch this movie. I still love it. I loved it when I was younger. I love it even more now. It totally holds up. Very, very entertaining. On top of being all that clever stuff, people should see it.
I'd definitely recommend it as well. In terms of where we're going, Dan, I'm doing a bit of an SEO choice, my friend, because the next week's podcast goes up on Patreon, I believe, on the 16th, and it goes up online on the 23rd of May. On the 19th of May, a sequel is released. So we're going back to the beginning, Dan. We're going back to family, and we are doing The Fast and the Furious.
Oh, very interesting choice.
And specifically to clarify,
is Fast X really coming out around that date?
Yep, Fast X is out on the 19th of May, and the Patreon version of the next episode is the 16th, and the YouTube online 23rd. Spotify version is the 23rd. So it seemed a logical choice, and just to It's probably obvious, but just to clarify, so we're definitely clear, we're talking about the very first movie, The Fast and the Furious, not just Fast and Furious or The Fate of the Furious. We're talking about the first movie.
Oh, man. I'm excited. That's a good choice. You told me last week it was a bad movie.
No, I said it. I said I wasn't like it could be. I wasn't sure whether it's I'm not going in confident that The Fast and the Furious holds up. Are you?
Look, there's got to be something to it, right?
I don't know, man. Like they're stealing DVDs. Like, who knows?
Yeah, that's the rule. You steal DVDs for a bit, and then you become a superhero. That's the path.
Yeah, I am also aware because obviously we've not done a Bond, we've not done a Marvel. I don't know. We have this thing of with Toy Story, we might gradually make our way through. I am aware. I think I'm setting us.
You are setting us on a path where we're going to be doing like a Fast and the Furious movie every year, basically.
and not necessarily because we haven't done a Toy Story movie every year. We haven't done that really.
But there are only 3 of those. We could do one.
Oh, 3 sequels. Yeah.
Yeah, there are only 3 more of those. We could do one every other season of Rewind Reviews and still like reasonably get them within a reasonable time frame. There are 10 of these.
Yeah,
we're pretty much going to have to do one every series if we ever want to get through them.
I think this is. We could have done it as a series, couldn't we? Because doesn't it end with 11? Oh well, it's too late now. But the
I don't know if I can do that again. Although I will say, and this is no one's ever going to hear this because it's the end of this podcast, but I'm really glad we did those Harry Potter ones now in hindsight because I feel like I've put Harry Potter behind me. Like I feel like doing those purged me of Harry Potter in a way I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, it's funny, and it's funny well, this is a much bigger topic and we haven't got time, but I will loop back round. But just to finish the fast thing, so yes, this potentially is, I think, the biggest, the longest running franchise we have started, as it were. I don't think we've, other than obviously Harry Potter, the Wizarding World, to give it its correct title technically. I don't think we've done a series with this many movies because we've not done a Marvel, we've not done a Bond, etc. Yes, it's funny. I've been really fascinated by it feels such a huge thing in our world. Correctly, the discord about J.K. Rowling, so ingrained in the the people I follow talking about. Oops, sorry, I hit my mic. The people I follow on YouTube talking about it, and it being such a big thing. But it's so funny, like cancel culture, because I have mates that just aren't ingrained in that at all, posting regularly online about how much they're enjoying Hogwarts Legacy, the game. And I'm just like, right. Oh, it's so funny because my main Discord around Hogwarts Legacy, the game, is people going, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I just can't. Yeah. I can't do it. I'm not doing it.
Which is where I landed.
Which is where you're at. Yeah.
As much as, which is as much, and that's crazy because when I was younger and into really at my height of my love of Harry Potter, that's the dream. That game. Wander around Hogwarts, enroll in classes, explore, go to Hogsmeade, all that stuff. That was that was it.
Yeah,
it's nuts. But now I'm just like, I'm not interested in playing that. The only time I'd consider playing that game is if they put it on Game Pass for free.
But yeah, there you go. So the key thing is the Fast and the Furious is next, baby.
Beautiful. Bam. All right. Well, if you want to hear that now, head over to the Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can hear episodes of this podcast and our other podcast, Analyzing Avatar, 1 week early. You can also get access to bonus podcast. We've already talked about it, so we can say, hey, there's a podcast we've got putting up called Nothing But Lyrics, where we just review the lyrics of a random song. We've recorded 2 of them at the stage we're recording this, and they're quite fun. So yeah, check those out if you're already on the Patreon. You can also get access to the Discord through the Patreon, which is why Chris keeps saying Discord instead of Discourse, which I think is funny. All the Discord around J.K. Rowling.
I am doing that, you're right. I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah. But there is, we have a Discord server. You can go on and you can chat to us on there. If you have comments and thoughts on any of the stuff we've said in this, you can email us, mail@nothingbutstatic.co.uk, or you can head to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/nothingbutstaticuk, in order to comment on the video that is relevant to the thought you have. So you can go to the Starship Troopers episode of Rewind Reviews on YouTube and stick a comment down there, and we will see it. Don't always reply. In fact, very rarely reply these days, but I just couldn't keep up with it. But please do. We really enjoy hearing it. And you commenting and liking and subscribing helps support the show. If you're on a podcast platform of choice, you can also support us by liking and subscribing and reviewing in all the ways that they offer you. You can also just keep listening. That helps. Or tell a friend. That helps too. Or if you're not enjoying this at all, weird, because it's like 3 hours long. I don't know why you're still listening. But please feel free to exit. That's fine. Just switch it off. Just delete it. No problem.
That's fine.
Not all things are for all people.
Yeah,
hope you. Fine. We appreciate you giving us a chance.
Yeah, thanks for giving it a shot, and hope you find something more to your taste.
Yeah, I recommend Nando V Movies podcast. Mostly nitpicking. It's very good. Sort of a similar vibe. They review a movie, pull it apart a bit. It's a bit more like focused on the details, whereas we talk big picture usually. But it's a good podcast. They say some interesting things.
Yeah, for sure.
And they do a mixture of new and old movies as well. So they might review the latest and greatest movies, or they might also review some older ones. So there you go. Go check that out. You might enjoy that. Anyway, that's everything for this week. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pass you over to Chris, who ends this podcast.
There we go. My name's Chris Billingham.
My name's Dan Doolan.
And this review has been Rewound.